It's Query and Company.
I'm going to be keeping you company for the next few hours.
You are not going to believe the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5, The Fan.
Well, you just heard the dulcet tones of Brendan King giving you the update from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which is where we are located, floor 3 of the Media Center, as a matter of fact, where Mother Nature is throwing havoc on this first day of practice for the 108th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race. Fastest so far today, Scott Dixon, 229.107 miles per hour. Honda has flexed their muscle. They have, as a matter of fact, 8 of the top 10 speeds turned today, although Stingray Robb, by the way, at 10th fastest, and Palou Award, the interlopers in that Honda party in their Chevrolets. But obviously way too early to know anything because just a number of laps. Nobody turned more than 15 laps today, as a matter of fact, before a drizzle. I wouldn't say a rain, but a drizzle began falling on this famed 2.5-mile oval. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jay Query. Jimmy Cook here as well. Eddie Garrison back in studio for us. It is Query and Company live from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and Alex Palou, I think, is going to join us here in just a little bit. But the big topic of conversation, obviously, over the course of today, Jimmy, is game number 5 in the NBA Eastern Conference semifinals between the Pacers and Knicks, and Indiana and New York both a chance to grab a real stranglehold on the series, but for Indiana in particular, because it would be 3 straight coming back to Indiana if they were to win it. But still a big one tonight.
Yeah, it's a massive, pivotal Game 5 where momentum can totally shift, and the tempo, not just of the series, but just game to game as things move on, gets amplified. Yes, you're going on the road to the Garden, where the Knicks have been as good as anybody within the NBA playoffs this year. You're going in a tough environment where Dante DiVincenzo, where Josh Hart, where Jalen Brunson, where their role players have been able to play better, though it should be noted, and we knew this going into yesterday, that for the Knicks, no OG Anunoby for Game 5. So that's a big loss for them, as that continues to be a likely extended absence for him, where the Pacers are able to capitalize to the shorthanded Knicks. Hartenstein, as you documented, Jake, hurting his arm in Game 4. What will his availability be like? The chess pieces are set up for the Pacers to take advantage and potentially, as you mentioned, have a 3-2 series lead going back to Cambridge on Friday.
You know, we should get the entire breakdown of the game from Alex Palou. Get every little bit of information possible from Alex Palou about Pacers and Knicks, right?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if I'm the most.
Pacers are going to win, right?
Absolutely, they will.
That's exactly what we want to hear. Hey, welcome to the show, Alex Palou. Of course, coming off of a really impressive day on Saturday in the Sancio Grand Prix and picking up the win there, where what you do, as I noticed, is you just don't make mistakes here, man. Like, you get out to the lead, you get going, and then there's just a precision. How much of race car driving is rhythm and confidence, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I did a couple of mistakes, man. Like, we started P1, lost the lead there. I just went into deep, locked my front right, and Lundgaard was able to get by. But, yeah, the car was solid. I was able to get into a rhythm. And I would say this is one of the only places where you have to go 100% every single lap, because the tire deck is not really high. And, yeah, it was about not making mistakes, trying to open the gaps. There was a late yellow that put us there in a bit of danger. But, yeah, so happy to get the first points win of the season.
Well, here's the thing. All attention changes now, as you know, for this city, for the fans, everything, to the Indy 500. And, you're
the Pacers.
And the Pacers. That's right. You know that. Pacers and racers, right?
Yes.
And you listen, your number 10 DHL Honda is going to be, for Chip Ganassi Racing, a real favorite, I think, in this race. You were not able to turn laps today. How much, and I don't know that we're going to. I mean, I think it's going to be like this probably the majority of the day. But how much learning is still out there? How much do you clamor to get back onto the oval?
Yeah, I mean, every day you learn so much. And especially we tested here back like a month ago or something, and it was a different car for us. Like, it's an actual different car, so we need to start again with a brand new car. It's the same as last year, but I mean, we haven't run it since the end of Indy 500 last year. We need to check that everything is good. I need to get comfortable again, need to get the gaps again good, and just knowing how the car feels on traffic alone with tire deck, and it's such a special place that you always learn. And there's as we are so many different sessions out on track, there's moments when you feel super happy with the car, and there's going to be moments where you feel like, oh man, this is really uphill for us. But everybody goes through these phases, having so many sessions. But yeah, I'm comfortable that hopefully we can improve a little bit to what we had last year.
Alex, at what point, ideally in the week, do you know or do you feel like, okay, the car's ready to go? We're ready to go out there and try to win this thing?
Hopefully, by the first run, you already have some feelings.
Really?
You already know that. I mean, if it's bad, you know that it's gonna get uncomfortable. And yes, you have time to get it comfortable. But I mean, when you start with a base that probably doesn't suit you, or something in the car that doesn't allow you to feel super comfortable, you know that it's gonna be a long week.
How many different follow me here. How many different cars will you drive this week? And by that I mean, I know it's the same cockpit you're getting in.
Yep.
But you will change the car to how many different setups to find the sweet spot?
It depends. I mean, if you can look at the scoreboard now, everybody that is above 224, I would say that they are pretty comfortable. They have a really good base, even though they've done only 9 laps. But to be able to do 229, 228, 225, it means that you're comfortable with your car and you have a lot of confidence. So they are not going to go through very big changes. I'm sure that they will go through 2 or 3, but no more than that. The rest, it depends. They probably go through more big changes. And even though if you go out and you feel amazing, there might be ways to feel even better. So we always try, especially when we have a base that we think it's like really close to being 100%, we say, okay, let's find another way. Let's find a completely different setup because it might be even better to what we have. So sometimes we found that stuff. Normally it doesn't work like that because, I mean, this car's been out for so long and the tires are different to last year, but they are still similar. So there's not much to find.
You have lived in, Alex Palou is our guest from Chip Ganassi Racing. You have lived in Indy now for how long?
This is my 4th year.
Okay, let me tell you why I asked that and what fascinates me about it. You grew up, I know that you're from Barcelona, Spain. Is that the city where you actually grew up, or did you just live there most recently in Spain?
No, yeah. I grew up there,
Okay.
like probably, I don't know, 40, 50 minutes away.
Okay, so Barcelona, I mean, I was able to go to Barcelona for the only time, but for the first time, I don't know, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's this, I mean, honestly, it may be the best city in the world. Now, I have not been to all cities, but I've been a fair amount of places, and I'm like, this place it's got Los Angeles in it. It's got a part that felt like New York. It's fantastic. So my question is, what, if anything, in any way, shape, or form, is a part of Indianapolis that makes you feel at home?
I mean, they're very different to what I'm used to in Spain. But I don't know. I feel like home when you have friends around, when you have your place that you like, and when you have your work here. So it feels like home for me. I wouldn't really change it. Like, I love Barcelona. Like, I love it. Every time I'm there, I'm in love. But I don't really miss it that much. I miss my family,
Really?
but I don't miss the city itself. I know it's always going to be there for me.
What parts of Indy do you like? Like, what part, when you're away from the track, you're getting away from you got a young family now. What part do you say, this is a cool place?
I don't move much. Like, I'm around Carmel, Zionsville, that area. I go sometimes to downtown, but not much. It's a bit busy for me. But then I go to the shop and I go back home, and that's my routine. Go to the gym. I don't really move much. I don't really go out much. I don't really eat out much. Yeah,
Really?
I'm a guy that stays home a lot, especially now with the babies.
Well,
so.
see, that's what I want you to give Jimmy advice, because Jimmy Cook, Alex Palou, Jimmy just found out recently that he's going to be a father for the first time.
Congrats, man.
Thank you.
Now, you just,
Big.
I was saying at the end of the broadcast, Alex, when you were coming around after the white flag, I said tomorrow he's going to celebrate Mother's Day with his wife for the very first time.
Yeah.
Because you just had your first child in December, right?
Absolutely.
So what advice do you have to Jimmy here?
Enjoy, man. It's enjoy. Listen to your wife. That's the most important.
Yeah,
you need to listen, even though you think you know, you don't know. And enjoy, man. It's amazing. It changes every day. I'm a very new father. Like I cannot really tell you much, but it's amazing. It's been 5.5 months of pure joy. It gets hard, but it's amazing hard. It's not like hard,
Right.
where you say like, oh, I cannot do it anymore. It's like hard that you're like, oh, this feels nice.
How much sleep do you get? Oh, sorry.
It was the same question, actually.
Basically, yeah.
I do a lot. She's very good, honestly. Sleeping-wise, she wakes up once. Sometimes she does the full night, but she wakes up once for like 10 minutes, gets a snack, which is a bottle, obviously.
Right.
And then goes back to sleep. So she's been good to us.
Where have you found, or have you at this point, the balance between your career and, being a dad? Like how much has that changed in the short, like you mentioned, 5-6 months?
Doesn't change much. I mean, when you think about how much time I was putting into my preparation, and how much time I thought I was putting into my preparation, but I was not really. I haven't had to change much. Like I wake up a bit earlier now. I go to the gym first thing in the morning, so I know I get that down. It's the most important thing. And then I have a couple of meetings, which that's what they said in the team or Honda or whatever. But the rest of the day, I am free. So I'm a lot busier now. But it didn't really change on my preparation. It actually motivated me more because I'm like, man, you cannot really lose time here and not preparing yourself, because you don't only need to worry about yourself and your wife, but when it's a kid, you know that you need to take care of that little human being.
Which was to you, Alex Palou, a more surreal or nerve-wracking reality? Looking down and realizing that you're a father and you now have the responsibilities that come with that, or the first time coming here, qualifying into the Fast 9 as a rookie, and the daunting task of 200 laps here?
It's a different nerve-wracking moment. I would say that I've been preparing for racing since I was 5. It's different races. It's go-kart. It gets bigger, but it's the same. It's a race, and the Indy 500 and qualifying, it's huge, and it's nerve-wracking. But
how old were you the first time you knew of the Indy 500?
I was probably, I don't know, like 10, 11, 12, around that. I was pretty young for being in Europe. But you prepare for racing since I was 5. But nobody prepared me to be a dad. And then suddenly there's a baby arriving in this world. So I would say being a dad is more like, oh my God, what do I do now? Like, how does this work? And is it like, do I now take the baby? Like, I remember when they told us to go home, I was like, are you not coming with us? Like, so what do you want me to do now as a dad? So it's amazing.
Now, Alex Palou, you know, when Helio Castroneves won his 4th Indianapolis 500, Alex Palou's our guest, the driver of the number 10 DHL for Chip Ganassi Racing. When you were the one chasing Castroneves, and it was a cat-and-mouse game the last several laps, you were a younger driver then. How much have you watched those laps, and how much do you recall those laps because you learned from it?
I do, and I watch it quite often, not to punish myself, but to be like, hey, I think you could do a little bit better than that. And at that time, it was my first race on an oval leading ever at the Indy 500 against Helio Castroneves. So, I mean, what can go wrong, right? Like, it's what are the odds that your first fighting Indy 500 has to be against probably one of the best drivers around here. So I watched it. I don't think, well, obviously I was not prepared to win because I didn't. But I think I have a lot more experience now. I don't know if I would win that race because he was timing it everything perfectly. But I think I would have done some things differently to try and win it.
Well, now, I mean, I guess if the situation presents itself again, do you revert back to that and say, okay, this is when he made that move and that made it that much harder for me to catch up with so many laps left, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. There's key points that he did that he thought about. He was like thinking laps ahead, right? I was just thinking about, oh, he overtakes me, I overtake him back. And I was not thinking. I was just racing. And
have you ever talked to him about it?
Yeah. Actually, after the race, I was like, I remember that I said, so did you plan on the traffic? Because there was traffic coming up, and that's what I think that screwed, not screwed, but that what caught me off guard. That for me, traffic was not there, and suddenly they popped up. But he was seeing the traffic, like you could see if you were looking far ahead. And I said, hey, did you plan on it? And he looked at me, he smiled, and he was like, of course.
Do you think there's a moment where stuff like that slows down for a driver?
Yes, I think so. I think once you know that you are in the zone, like once you've been through those moments, you plan ahead. And the good thing about this place, and good and bad thing, is that you always have new stuff. You have always new stuff and different stuff to think about. It can be the traffic, or it can be no traffic, but it can be the tow, and you have to just overtake him out of 4 because he's not good out of 4 or whatever. Like it's it always keeps on changing. It's always different because you always race against different cars and drivers, and that's why it's so special. It's so hard to win.
Lastly, Alex, you know, I think a lot of people know this, but for those that don't, you had agreed in principle to McLaren. I think it was last year. My years all run together. I'm older, but you know, and then obviously you still had a year left with Ganassi. You're still there. That kind of panned itself out, but there was all kinds of legal contractual stuff there, and it had to be a distraction. Is that all behind you? How have you navigated through that? Because it obviously has turned out really well for you in terms of in the race car, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was 2 years ago when everything started, and it was continuing to be a media thing last year, but it didn't really affect because it was already a year old,
right.
And it was different stuff, but it kept on going. It was the same thing. So not everything is 100%, but it's behind or it's not on my front windshield. It's more on like the side, and I don't really look at it.
But how did you? And I'm going to ask this for people listening that are going through a tough time, because you went through, I think, a tough time, but yet you couldn't tell it. It didn't affect, I'm sure it affected you, but it didn't affect your results. It didn't seem to affect your focus. It didn't affect your personality in interviews. I mean, you were like the same pleasant guy, but yet you had to be like, quit asking me about this, like you probably are now. But for people that are listening that are going through a tough time in their life, how did you navigate through it?
Well, I don't think it was such a tough time if you compare to other people's lives.
Right.
Like, I think I'm super lucky. Yes, there was a lot of controversy going on. There was big issues going on, legal stuff, blah, blah, blah. I was healthy. My family was healthy. I was still racing cars. And there was just 2 people fighting for me, and I was getting in trouble, not taking the right decisions. But that's it. It's not the end of the world. So obviously not proud about that, not proud about some decisions I took. But when I really thought about, like, hey, how bad I am, I was not that bad.
Okay, I'm going to show you something here real quick before we let you go, and you tell me if it looks familiar at all.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm putting you a test here. You can't the background, not the people, but the background. Does that look at all familiar?
Oh man. Not from here.
Okay, so when I was in Barcelona, I annoyingly reached out to you and said, listen, I need a place to go where there are no tourists, where if you are in Barcelona where you would go. And
that's a place.
You first said, funny, because there's nowhere in Barcelona with no tourists, right? And then you pointed out this bar. It's right there on the beach. I forget the name of it.
I don't know the name now, but I remember.
But that's exactly what you sent us.
And you liked it?
It was perfect. Honestly, it was perfect.
There's almost no people.
And totally, it was great. And we went and just had like lunch and a beer, like and watched people surf. And I'm like, that was the best call ever, right? So lastly, Alex, in terms of great calls, tonight, Game 5, it's 2-2 Pacers, Knicks apiece. I saw you at one Pacer game once, so I don't know if you're a Pacer fan, if you were just there for the game, how much you get a chance to watch it.
I was there just for the game. I don't follow much, but I'm a Pacer fan, obviously, because I'm from here.
Okay, so who wins Game 5 tonight, Pacers or Knicks?
Pacers by far, 100%.
All right.
They have no chance. I'm sorry.
All right, there we go. Alex Palou, again, going to be – now, didn't get a chance to turn any laps today, right?
Not yet, but it's okay. We have a long time, and, at least Scott is in P1. He feels good with the car.
I was going to say, he obviously feels pretty good about the car, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, have a safe month, all right, or a
Thank you, guys.
safe week, and we look forward to watching you in qualifying and in the 108th Indianapolis 500 as well, and look forward to having you back on. We always have the winner on Monday, so we'll see. Right?
I'll see you Monday then.
All right, appreciate it. Alex Palou, driver of the number 10 DHL Honda for Chip Ganassi Racing, and certainly one to watch. As he had mentioned, his teammate Scott Dixon, fastest today, 229.107 miles an hour, just in front of Marco Andretti and Takuma Sato. Those are the front three. He says Pacers easily tonight.
I like it. I like the confidence.
Like that confidence, right?
I feel like if you're being the most optimistic, maybe idealistic of Pacers fans, you're hoping that you broke the Knicks in Game 4. And it's tied 2-2, and sure, they're going back to the Garden, but maybe it is an Alex Palou avalanche prediction, and the Pacers get it done tonight.
Now, what do you think, in terms of tonight, Jimmy, when it comes to New York, surely we're not going to see the same Knicks that we saw in Game 4. I mean, but they are so banged up. Is it realistic to think that Indiana still has advantage, or do you expect kind of the return to normalcy for the Knicks because they're in the Garden?
I would be pretty surprised if across the board from New York, especially their big three, you get the same type of underwhelming performance. What was it, like a combined 27, 29 points from Brunson, from DiVincenzo, from Hart in Game 4. I mean, that thing was over by the end of the first quarter. You can make an argument it was probably over earlier than that, but they never got the wind underneath their sails. They never got the type of drives to the lane or wide open triples that they were accustomed to. They missed a couple wide open looks as well, but things for the first time this series did not come easy for New York. That said, look, Tom Thibodeau is as proud of a coach as anybody in the National Basketball Association. His teams generally are pumped up, get psyched up for games. You're not going to need that extra energy in the playoffs, but you're certainly not going to need the extra shot of adrenaline that comes with playing in a building that during the regular season they only dropped 14 games at. I mean, New York is – Jake, maybe I'm reading too much into the human element of this versus the actual strategy of the game, but the Knicks have shown too many times in this playoffs, I think you'd agree with this as well, too many times in this series that they're a special group that appears to just not pay attention to other elements that are impacting them. You could give them just 8 guys on the roster, 5 of which put at the Y, and as long as it's Jalen Brunson and Dante DiVincenzo stirring the drink out there, they're going to find a way. They're going to clash the grass. They're not going to lay down and fold, which is why Game 4, I think, surprised so many people. I don't expect that type of result tonight. I think it's a down-to-the-wire game like most New York playoff games has been, but part of my rationale for that is not just that Jalen Brunson is an incredible player. I mean, you've seen it firsthand, too. There's just something like they had no business being in Game 3, and they almost won it. Like, they don't die. They do not die, which is why what happened in Game 4, I think, winds up being an anomaly compared to the rest of the series.
I think a really good point was made to us yesterday on social media from a listener that chimed in, and I apologize, I don't have the name in front of me, that said, if you're looking for optimism to break the tie, okay, in terms of the remainder of this series, then, you got a best-of-3 series now. The Pacers have put themselves in position where it's a best-of-3. And in the games that New York won, in 2 of those, they played about as well probably as they can play in the Garden, and yet both of them, Indiana had a shot to take those games. And in the game where Indiana played their best, they blew New York off the floor. The Pacers narrowly missed getting. Oh, now you could obviously make the argument New York also
it's
narrowly
glass
missed.
half full, glass empty, right?
New York had a game here but the bottom line is you knew that Indiana, in order to win this series, was going to have to win one in New York. It probably should have come in Game 1, truth be told, but it didn't. So now they've got to get it. But I do feel like tonight, and I know that there is history, and yes, Reggie Miller ain't walking through that door. Dale Davis and Antonio Davis aren't stepping on that floor. But I know that there is history of the Pacers going into the Garden winning into Game 7. But that was 30 years ago. I mean, the odds are against you. You don't want to put yourself in that position to go in and have to go to the Garden and win a Game 7. You get it tonight, and then you come back here and you let the chips fall. And again, I know there's also precedent of coming back with a chance to close out the Knicks in a Game 6. John Starks ain't walking through that door. Spike Lee, well, Spike Lee probably is. but you get what I'm saying, right? I mean,
But there's something about this series, to your point, with all the history, with all the idea of going on the road into Game 7. And maybe this is me, again, being more bullish on the Pacers, but the history of that building worries me. These two teams together in a Game 7, even if it's in New York, does not worry me. I'm not saying that with full confidence, hey, the Pacers are guaranteed to win a Game 7 on the road, but I feel like they are equipped to handle that pressure, and they are equipped to at least have a shot late in that type of game, just like they did in Game 1 and just like they did in Game 2. But you're not going to hear an argument from me, Jake, of the idea they win tonight and then Friday is an opportunity to close it out in what would be 4 consecutive wins from a Pacers team that, again, many listeners, you and I have had the conversation as well. It's a philosophical glass half full, glass half empty conversation, but many listeners might look at it and say the Pacers should be looking to close out tonight because of how well they played and how close they were in games 1 and 2. For whatever reason, these two rosters, not the history, not the legacy, these two rosters, the idea of a Game 7 in New York does not seem insurmountable like maybe it would have in the 90s.
Right. It does feel like a Game 7 would be tough, though, right?
Yes, yeah.
Let's be real.
Of course. It's
Now,
the Garden. Come on.
You know, but I think the other thing that's interesting about it for Indiana is this run here, if you want to call it a run. And it's funny because I think about it, Jimmy, and I'm like, they won a playoff series, right? They won a playoff series, and then, but even with that, it's a pretty sizable accomplishment with a young team that you're trying to build, but now an opportunity to win a second one. I think it does. The timeline has been accelerated. I think the Pacers organization now looks at it and says, okay, we've kind of done our work here. We traded away Sabonis. We got Halliburton in here. We got him a Robin to run with in Pascal Siakam that has size and can score in the low block. We got 2 players that we drafted that we think can contribute, and one of them is already ahead of schedule in Ben Shepherd. Obviously a more mature player, but than Walker.
Right.
But they also have, between Nembhard and Nesmith, they acquired 2 young pieces around. So then you wonder, because they're still going to have money under the cap, and Toppin is a guy that also I think Toppin has played himself into long-term consideration of staying with the franchise, right? And so you look at all of those things and you wonder if they especially were to win this series, how far then do they push in the offseason in terms of the acquisitions and the moves they would make?
If you go to the conference finals with this group, Jake, and you've talked about the conversation around Pascal Siakam and how much you evaluate extending him or not, and yes, we're going to do a debate for hours on end about the length of such a contract. If you go to the conference finals with this group, it is hard not to look around and say, let's retain first and then look at adding second, because you would have been, because of that Siakam move, most notably, Toppin's been great, but because of that Siakam move to catapult yourself to the conference finals, yes, this is not a perfect team, but it is a core that you'd be interested in developing around when they would most certainly, maybe I'll hear you out on, no, they could have won a series without him. Okay, sure. They are certainly, if they go to the conference finals, at least a year ahead of schedule with where they should be. That warrants a look internally about keeping this core together.
When we come back, more on Pacers-Knicks, and that's not the only big basketball event happening in relation to the state of Indiana. We'll get into that as well. We'll keep you updated on what happens at IMS. But before that, Jimmy, on the other side, I think I might have upset a coworker.
Uh-oh.
I think I might have upset a coworker. I don't know if HR is going to call me in. I'll let you know what I'm talking about on the other side. Live from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Query & Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
The IRS is the most powerful collection agency on
Earlier this morning, I was on the wake-up call with KB and Andy, and
7 to 10 a.m. on these very airways.
that's right, 7 to 10 a.m. every day on these airwaves. And Kevin asked me a couple of good questions in terms of race car drivers and what pacer they would be analogous with. It made me proud, actually. I had a tear of pride in my eye because that was such a Jake Query thought process that I felt like there must have been some sort of a, Kevin and I, when we did the show together.
You felt like you left an impression, Jake.
Exactly, left an impression on him. I was very proud of it. And then Andy, who obviously I like, notably because he allows me to sleep in. I don't mean that to say that we're sleeping next to one another, but because he goes in the morning, that allows me to sleep in. And Andy, Kevin proposed the question to me that I guess recently they were discussing Andy's prep work for carb day and race day. And I'm going with more of the race day answer here because he's going to have to work on carb day. And he was saying on race day that his plan of attack, Andy Sweeney's, is 2 IPAs before 9 a.m., followed by light beer for extended hours, and then capping off with bourbon. And
is this all before the race, or is this the totality of the day capping off with bourbon?
Either way, both are real, like...
You're stirring a cauldron of danger right there, Jake. You really are.
Here's my thing. So he said that, and Kevin and I both were like, yeah, man, like I'd probably lift off the throttle a little bit there, right? And Andy said, no, you guys don't understand. Like I'm a veteran here. I know what I'm doing, and I get it. I totally understand it, and I don't dispute that about Andy at all, right? But having said that, I don't know that anybody who's never been to the Indy 500 understands the animalistic nature of what we're talking about here. Like, you can say to me, like, no, you don't understand. I can hang at a bachelor party. I've been to Hooters before. And it's like, yeah, but you're getting ready to go to Hedonism 2 in Jamaica. Like, we're talking completely different atmosphere here. I mean, you can – I don't know if people understand this or not, but you get in the wrong group or the wrong element here at the Speedway, and your BAC goes up 0.03 just through osmosis,
There's
right?
a fine line, and I don't think anybody's questioning about this, Andy, being somebody that can handle your alcohol and then being thrown to the wolves.
Correct.
That is this venue.
Correct. And not only that, but there is – and look, you can come out to the Speedway and have fun without drinking and whatever. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Diet Cokes are perfectly sufficient.
That is correct. Diet Coke's perfectly sufficient. But if you are deciding that that's the pool that you're diving into, that's cool. But you are literally up on the diving board with 10,000 Greg Louganises into a pit of sharks, okay? So I don't care how gracefully you Rodney Dangerfielded at Hillcrest Country Club. It is a totally different beast. And then in addition to that, I mean, you got to understand, this is a place where, and this is a true story, several years ago on Carb Day, I was parked in the infield lot, and it was when Kid Rock was in concert here, and I needed to get through the crowd in order to get to where my car was parked. And parting the seas was just not even a possibility. And I see 2 guys carrying a stretcher. And I thought, well, there we go. These guys are like Moses. They're going to part this sea and I'll just follow them. So then naturally I have to see where they're going, right? I've got to rubberneck it a little bit. And they roll up on a guy that probably started his day with 2 IPAs and then had a couple of light beers and then capped it off with some bourbon. And he was laying on his back wearing overalls with 1 sock on and 1 sock barefoot, or 1 foot barefoot, 1 latch undone on his overalls, and the flies wide open, and his glories hanging out, and people are rolling bottled water off the back of his neck, and they immediately started pumping his stomach, and fortunately it looked like I think he was going to be okay, but they whisked him away in an ambulance, and so I began asking around, doing investigative reporting, and they informed me that on a $5 bet he bonged a 5th of Jack. Now, that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with here, right? So, like, look, I get it.
This is the show. I mean, Only at the top are you going to find that kind of whim.
Yeah, so, I mean, my point being, like, you can tell me that you ran wind sprints in high school as a homeschooled kid, and that doesn't mean that you're ready to go with Usain Bolt in the 100-meter dash, right? So, but the other thing, too, that happens out here is whatever the temperature says and whatever the humidity level says, increase both by 20%, right?
Yeah.
So you think, like, I can handle an IPA. It's 72 out. No, that really means 85 and sticky.
It's real temp versus track temp, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Everything's thicker out here. Everything's a little – so you might think that you're just drinking yourself a Sierra Nevada IPA. What you're really drinking is a Mrs. Butterworth's. Like, it just is different out here, right? I'm just saying, you got to pace, you got to temper it. So I said to Andy, it's like going to Carnegie Hall. Don't take your violin in the first time, right? Listen to the actual professional musicians, get a gauge for things, and then if you want to show up, you're good to go, right? Like, just for example, this is a prime example. Kurt Darling just walked in, right? Like, we all know now that Kurt's here, like, we wouldn't come in here and try to, like, immediately start doing the updates and news like Kurt, right? We gently move in, and then once Kurt's here, we're like, okay, now we can merge in with traffic, right? But you got to let the pros be the pros. Kurt, you would not, if you're Andy Sweeney, you wouldn't come out here with 2 IPAs followed by light beer, followed by bourbon to top it off on your first go-round, right?
Well, I don't know about the bourbon, but everything else. Yeah, but no, absolutely not. No, you hydrate. That's the thing. You come.
That's exactly right.
You hydrate. No,
it is a different animal out here, right?
No, yeah, it's not just a race. It's the whole day. Like, it starts at 5 o'clock in the morning, even before the bomb goes off, and then it lasts till about 9 o'clock at night. So,
I mean, you don't want your bomb going off by 9:30 is what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, not at all.
It's important to pace yourself. All right, so Kurt Darling's out here to do track updates along with Brendan King. Right now, as you can hear Brendan in the background doing the updates, there's not much going on because of rain. But Indiana Fever in action tonight as well, correct, Jimmy?
It is. It is the season opener for the Indiana Fever against the Connecticut Sun on the road, the long-awaited debut of Caitlin Clark. You know, Jake, I was doing a hit in Kansas City last week. They were asking about Pacers and Knicks and, you know, the ramp up of that series. And the last question that they wanted to know about was, how have things changed since Caitlin Clark has arrived here? And the easy answer was, well, 13,000 people came to a preseason game. The WNBA preseason game was attended by 13,000 fans, and the official season itself hasn't even gotten underway yet. Look, I don't know where the growing pains will arrive for Caitlin Clark. They will inevitably happen because they happen for any rookie coming into their first elevated level at professional sport, regardless of if it's baseball, football, or basketball. Throwing any sport out there, there's always growing pains. But you have enough leadership on this roster, and you have another franchise piece, and maybe the or at least before Caitlin Clark, the primary face of the franchise of the current Fever in Aaliyah Boston there. I'm looking forward to seeing what that tandem look like as the games really matter now. And this is a franchise that the last couple of years, Jake, has been stuck in mediocrity, stuck in the lottery. And, hey, it worked out. It got you generational talent in back-to-back years. Now what do you do with it?
Jimmy, I'm going to make an observation here on Caitlin Clark that I know I have said several times. And I apologize for the repetitiveness of it, but it really is what fascinates me. And that is that Caitlin Clark is somebody who, if you look at what makes her unique, and if you look at what sells tickets, and if you look at what makes her the phenomenon that she is, and why girls all across the country are wearing her shirts and watching her, it's because of the scintillating offensive explosions that she would have at Iowa, of the Steph Curry pull-up, half-court shots, you know, all of that stuff, right? And the quick nature with her quick release and all of those things. And all of those things are mesmerizing and fascinating and incredibly entertaining. And she is capable of doing that. But at least at the outset of her WNBA career, that is not what is required or requested of her as an Indiana Fever player. This is a franchise that, and I know that she's led them in scoring in the preseason, but this is a franchise that setting up opponents is what they are first going to ask her to do. Now, that's not to say that she will not eventually work into situations where everything is indeed going through her, but her court vision and her passing are what are going to help her win games at the WNBA. But that doesn't necessarily equate to what makes her the Taylor Swift phenomenon that she is.
And it also fascinates me, Jake, the idea of she won't be this on the floor, So decoy is the wrong word, but the assignment's the proper word. She is such a unique and tough assignment. How much does defenses focusing solely on her open up things for your players that have already been here, like Aaliyah Boston? That's where her high-level passing skills come into play. She knows she still has the long-range, Curry-like range in her bag. How often do they have to go to that versus letting everything come naturally to her and knowing that she does not have to be the focal point that she was with Iowa because she's playing with the best collection of talent she's ever played around in her life?
Hey, Jake. We used to start, quote, training in December for the race in May. Andy doesn't know what he's getting into. I'm telling you, man. I'm telling you. Nothing against Andy at all, man. I'm excited for Andy to see his first Indy 500, but it is absolutely a different beast, different animal. It's
I can't wait. I can't wait for the Andy Sweeney victory selfie when he is just sipping on that bourbon. Just underneath the pagoda at the end of the 500 with a nice victory pump saying he conquered the mountain. I'm rooting for Andy in this battle. I want to see
I don't
him.
dispute that he'll stay awake the whole time. I'm just saying, like, it's a long haul, man. It's a long, long, long day. But it is the best day of the year. It's the best sporting event. It's fun. It's awesome, everything about it. And if you want to attend the 108th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race, which, of course, is 1 week from this Sunday, we have tickets to give away. Eddie Garrison, I will ask you when exactly we are doing the ticket giveaway. Do we know just yet?
Yeah, later in the show.
Between now and 3, we have tickets to give away. So that means, correct, you need to keep listening. The Aquarium Company here at 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Join JMV Thursday, May 16th, live from Pivot Bar in
Had somebody reach out to me to say that they listened to some of the New York sports talk radio this morning in anticipation of Pacers-Knicks in the Garden. What do I think? Pacers-Knicks in the Garden tonight. And then I can't say the guy's answer. Greatest moment in local television history with Ed Sorensen on Channel 6. That's right. Tonight in the Garden, Gotham, New York, Pacers-Knicks. What do I think? But the narrative apparently amongst the New York sports talk radio phone callers was simple. The overwhelming theme appears to be, Jimmy, that New York fans believe that it is going to be a necessary, heroic 40-point night from Jalen Brunson. Not that that happens, but that's what would have to happen for New York to win the game.
Well, I think a lot of the Knicks, at least in my lifetime, and no one's going to feel bad for them because it's New York, and I'm not asking you to feel bad for them, but just the reality of it is they've been a tortured fan base that knows different ways to lose games. And I think there is a large mentality, not of the team, but of the fan base in New York, because I've done the same thing, listened a little bit to see what the pulse is over there. They feel like the series was lost when they lost Game 3. Because you're on the doorstep of an insurmountable lead that's never been rallied from in the history of the NBA, being up 3-0. And it takes a Nembhard 32-foot heave to bury you. And then the series turns. Does that mean that they're going to lay down tonight in New York? No, that'd be silly for all that Jalen Brunson is, all that DiVincenzo has been this series, the, pardon the pun, heart of Josh Hart. I do not expect anything less than 100% from the Knicks tonight. That said, the fan base, different than what's going on in that locker room, the fan base is a sensitive one that I feel, from what they've said, thinks this series totally turned when Nembhard's prayer gets answered late in the shot clock in Game 3.
I'll tell you what, that shot from Nembhard, I mean, when Nembhard hit that shot, and I don't think I shared this on Monday, when he hit that shot, he turned around, and, the team kind of erupts and runs out towards him. And he got about 5 steps. And Nembhard's a pretty stoic guy. He's not a real show type guy. But he took about 5 steps and then uncorked like a half grin to all of his teammates that basically said, yeah, I was surprised also. I know that was a heck of a shot. But it was an amazing shot, right?
It might have turned the series. Knicks fans might be right. It might have turned everything around. Not for their benefit, for Pacers fans.
I think Nembhard has a stoic, I've been there before look about him at most times, which I don't know that Andy Sweeney's going to have by noon on race day, right? With the proper strategy.
I'm taking the over for Sweeney. I believe in him.
All right, 1 hour down here, Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Again, under caution, you will hear Brendan keeping you updated on what happens out here, as well as us throughout the course of the day. But right now, still a slight drizzle. But show goes on, right? And we will continue talking about it, including your phone call. Scott Agness going to join us coming up about an hour from now, not only to talk about the Pacers, but Fever as well, and tickets to give away for the 108th running of the Indy 500. We have yet to do that. We will continue talking and giving those tickets away as well. You're listening on The Fan.
Come on, Indy. Don't use the spring to paint your house year after year.
Guy, by the way, was at Pacers game 4. John Mellencamp sat just beside Dario Franchitti and Scott Dixon and sat stoically the entire time.
Brother Bob ran into him after the
Did he?
after the game. Yeah, he went.
It was funny because I was in the little restaurant area and I'm like, that guy over there looks like Mellencamp, but you don't think to see. I mean, it was from afar, right? And then I'm like, oh wow, that is Mellencamp. Now, what'd your brother say about him? Nice guy? Not a nice guy?
Yeah, he had. I'm gonna.
Reputation is that he's surly.
Yes, very nice. Bob famously will treat anybody like any other person. Doesn't matter. So he was very casual with him. Mellencamp was the same. Second time, I believe he had encountered him. He encountered him once way back in the Bloomington days. For those that don't know, we're not going to dive into this and waste a segment on it, but the Cook family tree, my brother is about 10 years older than Jake. So he's in his 60s. So it's about the time frame you're talking about. We talk about Bloomington. So there you go.
By the way, so far here at the track, here's what you have. 23:37. That is the total amount of green time, 23 minutes, 37 seconds before rain fell. In that time, 219 total laps turned. Kyle Larson, who you may have heard about, a lot of eyes on Kyle Larson. He turned 2 laps today. So the key numbers here today, Kyle Larson 2, Kurt Darling sandwiches 3, which he just housed down in the commercial break, which was impressive, right? Literally 3 wraps in like a minute and a half. It was one of the more impressive things I've seen. I don't know if there's a game show going on here or what we're doing, but I was impressed. I will say that.
Training to be the next Joey Chestnut.
Kurt Darling is indeed Joey Chestnut, but Kurt, here's the thing, and yeah, shocker. You've been here though. For what it's worth, to be fair to you, you've been on the air since 4 this morning, and you got to work till midnight, right?
Not midnight, but something like that.
You thought I was kidding about the full sandwich here, right?
He's dedicated to the rap count. I admire it.
You caught me mid-bite.
Now, Kurt, here's the thing. I spent a lot of time out here in the month of May, but in all honesty, and so do like Greg Rakestraw, Scotty Johnson's here a lot, I think you actually logged the most hours here, and I'm saying that seriously, right?
Oh, I would say that's probably accurate, yeah.
What time does your alarm go off in the morning?
I usually get, well, it depends. Am I doing Monday AM sports or not? Because if I'm doing Monday AM sports, I get up at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And then if I'm not doing the AM sports shift, I get up a little bit before 3 every morning.
And you go to bed at what time?
Anywhere between 8 and 10 o'clock.
Okay. That's actually the similar hours to most serial killers, just so you know. That's where it begins. So enjoy it now, right?
I mean, to work in a newsroom, you have to have a screw loose.
No, you're right about that. You're right about that. All right, so Kurt Darling will be doing the updates along with Brennan King as we're out here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But back to the game tonight. Jimmy, did you watch any of Boston last night?
I did. I watched enough to see that even though the Cavs were shorthanded, you got some inspiring performances across the board in that game. Darius Garland, leading the charge at times, but it felt like, and Jake, you pointed this out many times during the playoffs, it felt like once again another instance where the Celtics, with this path they've had to the now conference finals up 3-1, 95% of the time, teams close it out leading 3-1 in the playoffs. They've had ability to kind of be in cruise control. Like the Celtics, even though the Cavs hung around in that game, never really felt like they were in danger. Sometimes championship paths just open up for you. Pacers fans can't complain about that because they have finally, for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time ever, been the beneficiaries of a injury-ridden roster on the other side of the floor. You can't control that. Sometimes basketball gods just shine down on you, and that's what you are being presented with. For Boston, rather, it has been, you're the 1 seed, you earned that right. You're going through Miami. You're going against a Cleveland team that's somewhat banged up now with Donovan Mitchell missing time. For the Pacers, the Bucks have issues with their stars in Giannis Antetokounmpo, who never features playing time in that series, and Damian Lillard winds up hurting his ankle, and now here you are against the Knicks, where bodies are dropping all across the board. Mitchell Robinson earlier in the series, and then OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson hurts his ankle. So there's a lot of weird storylines in regards to health that have impacted both the Pacers and the Celtics' run to this stage, and the Celtics obviously on the doorstep, the Pacers more work to be done. But last night, it was more to your point, Jake, Boston, at least in the East, has had a feeling of inevitability all year, and they showed it again last night against a shorthanded Cavs team. Give credit to Cleveland. They didn't roll over without Donovan Mitchell, but it never really felt like the Cavs were going to bottle that one away.
Listen, I just think Boston.
The Celtics are going to bottle that one away.
I think Boston's really, really good. I mean, that's just the bottom line, right? I really hope Indiana wins this series, and I think it'd be really good for them to get into the Eastern Conference Finals. It'd be great for the city. It'd be great for the fan base. It'd be great for all of it. But the reality is that Boston, at this point, has to be. I mean, I don't even know, Jimmy. You're the resident degenerate. What are the odds right now in Boston winning the East? I mean, it's got to be 1.5 to 1.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're the clubhouse favorite by a mile. They have been for this entire run, and it continues to get stronger and stronger to that point where they only have a series to go. And then you look out west. I mean, you're treated to, if you stayed up late enough to watch that one, the Thunder and the Mavericks. It looks like Dallas is going to put OKC in a 3-1 hole, and maybe this is another story of a number 1 seed in the NBA playoffs falling earlier than expected in the conference semis, but they're able to put together a great team rallying around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Chet Holmgren and some Jared Wallace blocks throughout that game. Like they played tough, tenacious defense for the final 6-7 minutes of that ball game that led to nice transition buckets, and they're able to escape Dallas with a not just 196 victory, but tie this thing at 2 games apiece, headed back to Oklahoma City. I get it, there's only 2 series left on either side of the bracket, Jake, but Pacers-Knicks has been carrying the full weight of the playoffs prior to Game 4, where it's close, down-to-the-wire games. You don't know which way the thing's going to wind up turning. Boston's yet to have that test. It has been the West that has had, for the most part, your more drama-filled evenings, no more so than last night against Oklahoma City and Dallas, and then you're really getting the stage set with Denver and Minnesota, the young up-and-coming hungry Timberwolves, and the champion-proven Denver Nuggets. No home team has won a game there. You're really getting the makeup of what feels like 2 7-game series down to the wire to earn your spot in the Western Conference Finals.
I would like to know this. Which game, by the way, this is impressive. Darling's now one of the cookies. This is unbelievable. It really is like sitting next to Joey Chestnut. This is one of the more remarkable things I've ever seen.
Those cookies are pretty tasty. I haven't had one yet today, but I don't fault him on that. They're very good.
I'm not disputing, but he's on pack 3. So
something has to be turned if Lap's going to be
things.
Jake, okay,
you're right.
He's wearing that cape. You admire it.
No, and he's like fit too. That's I mean,
correct.
I think I'm envious of the fact that back in the days when you could house 6,000 calories in 10 minutes and lose weight. It's incredible.
Yep.
2 things in the NBA that have happened here in the offseason that quite frankly, I'm like, did I hit the snooze button on this? I didn't hear anything about this. And those 2 storylines that are taking place in the NBA right now, and I'm assuming that other teams may feel this way about Indiana, but the first is, and I think you made this point yesterday, Jimmy, did you even know the NBA draft lottery was happening until you heard that Atlanta got the number 1 pick?
I had no idea, and I usually pride myself on that because it's an integral nugget towards the offseason. You know how much I love NBA Summer League, and the first step towards that is the draft lottery. And then all of a sudden I see JMV making a joke on Twitter about, I'm glad all those good losses or fun losses, however it was phrased, are over with. And then I start digging more, and I'm like, wait a minute, 3% chance, we're talking about odds. Oh, that was today? Atlanta defied the odds? And there was a great story in The Athletic, Jake, and I know you can't control when everything goes perfect circle for a moment in sports history, but the overwhelming stories from the draft lottery over the weekend, which Atlanta winds up winning, only a 3% chance, and they defy the odds and end up with the top pick in June's draft. It was very calm, laid-back demeanor amongst a lot of the general managers, at least in terms of firsthand reports, versus last year, it's lips locked, nervous Nellies all over the place, everybody just wanting to make sure that they're focused on the picks at hand because it was a generational draft.
Right.
What if
and a generational number 1, right?
What if you would have had that lottery chaos last year? Like that was the overwhelming takeaway. What if you have a big leap like that, a 3% chance at number 1 a year ago when it was a surefire decision at 1 versus this year where it's all up in the air with what's going to happen.
Well, I mean,
for the number one overall pick.
I think it's more so just there is no. I think if you stopped last year, if we were at IMS and we stopped 100 people and just said, "Hey, who's going to be the first player taken in the draft?" Many probably would not have known Wembanyama's name, but they would have said, "Oh, it's that 7'6" guy from France," right?
Yes.
I mean, everyone would have known what that was. Now,
and in tune to the market, you made that point yesterday off the air. If it doesn't impact your direct market,
correct,
it has less of an allure.
So that was one storyline though, where I'm at the game and all of a sudden I get like a push alert that says the Atlanta Hawks, and I actually had to remind. I'm like, wait a minute, didn't Atlanta? Weren't they in the playoffs? And then I'm like, oh no, I guess they were in the play-in game. It just seemed odd. But then the second thing, though, that has happened in the NBA that's a storyline that I'm wondering if I slept through it. And I know they have good players. Obviously, they have 2 top 20 players. But have you heard anything about the Dallas Mavericks all year? I mean,
outside of the existence of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, no, I've not heard a ton.
And the only thing that has been more relatively obscure or anonymous than Dallas this year, quite frankly, is Oklahoma City. And I get that. I mean, but Oklahoma City has been sitting on draft capital since literally since the second Bush administration, and it's now starting to come to fruition. But you do realize now, and this is what is always hard for me to grasp, but you probably hear on this radio show when we have people on from other markets, I ask them the outside Indianapolis perspective of our teams and our market. And yes, Indianapolis is not Oklahoma City. We in Indianapolis know that. But I think to the rest of the league, Oklahoma City is thought of in the same, or Indiana is thought of as the same market as in Oklahoma City. Like if you were to talk to people in Philly, New York, L.A., and say, like, okay, we're going to play word association, Oklahoma City Thunder. I think more often than not, they would say Indiana Pacers, Milwaukee Bucks, whatever, Orlando Magic, right? And so it gives you an idea. The reason we don't hear a lot about Oklahoma City, even though they have very, very good young players, and I think, people know of Chet Holmgren and know of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but it's Oklahoma City, right?
A lot of animosity to that AT&T ad also help people familiarize themselves.
I'll tell you what, you're not kidding there, right?
But no, I mean, I know there's a separate split between, especially in this market, Pacers fans and fans of the NBA as a whole. But if you consider yourself in the latter camp, being a fan of the entire NBA, not just the Pacers, you know of Chet Holmgren, not just because of his injury, his rookie season, and his journey to this point, and his time at Gonzaga, but you know of him, and you know of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But it's other pieces, Luguentz Dort, who's been sensational for them throughout this playoff run. Jalen Williams, who chips in 14 for them last night, was great. And it was, I apologize, I got names mixed up. It was Cason Wallace that winds up with a block or two last night. Critical down the stretch, blocks a 3, I believe, from Kyrie Irving late in that game, if I'm remembering everything correctly. But there are good household names within NBA fandom on this Oklahoma City team, but it goes back to this weird transitional phase that you and I discussed once you started to see stars bow out in the first round of the playoffs, Jake, which is that the torch has been passed from Steph Curry. The torch has been passed, maybe not fully, but has been passed from Kevin Durant and LeBron James to the point that you have this next wave of stars that the league has to figure out not only how to market, but how to position them to a point where the league as a whole still matters to fans. It certainly matters to advertisers. Look no further than what we talked about yesterday with 2.6 or 2.8, whatever it is, $1 billion likely being the investment on the third-tier package of the NBA by NBC. The money is there. Live sports, at least in 2024 and beyond, continue to be one of the most marketable aspects for media rights deals in all of sports, really in all of the world. So maybe the eyeballs aren't quite where the NBA wants them to be, but the dollars are there, and they have a lot of nice young pieces that can represent the league moving forward, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like Anthony Edwards, like Tyrese Halliburton here, like Jalen Brunson. There are star young pieces there, but it is a weird kind of, oh, that's right, that team's really good, or oh, that guy's there happening within the fandom of the league.
Here's what's interesting, though, Jimmy. If you really think about eras of like superstars in the NBA, and a lot of it was by happenstance. But just for example, in the 1970s, the dominant teams, I'm trying to think of the dominant teams of the NBA in the 1970s. I mean, you did have, it was kind of like a hodgepodge era. You had
New York won a title in the 70s.
But yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the decade, right? But you have Bill Walton was a star and he won a title in Portland, but it's like almost like this forgotten title, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Seattle won a title in the 70s. The Washington was in the finals in the 70s. But then when you go to the 80s, what's fascinating is you have Boston, which is a big market, and they got Larry Bird because they had the savviness to draft him the year prior. Red Auerbach drafted his rights in 1978.
Can you imagine if that was still a thing today, by the way? The craftiness and chaos that would consume in today's.
And you also wonder if guys would stay. Like, for example, if you knew you could get drafted into the NBA and you were given NBA guaranteed money, but you still were able to go back to college for a year, how would that change things? But
especially with NIL, that'd be a fascinating.
But you had Magic Johnson going number 1 overall to Los Angeles, even though it was like this anomaly year where the Lakers got the number 1 pick, and so Magic Johnson's going and he's joining. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and then 2 years later they get the number 1 again, and they have James Worthy. So now you have the biggest superstars in big markets. And then in the 90s, Chicago, again, by happenstance, and people forget this, but lest I remind them, that the Chicago Bulls selected Jordan 3rd overall, but the 2nd overall pick, which was Portland, originally belonged to Indiana. And Indiana had traded that pick to Portland, and that's why the Blazers had the 2nd overall pick and took Sam Bowie instead of Jordan. So Jordan ends up in Chicago. So the best team of the 90s, again, market number 3. We are used to the biggest stars being in the biggest markets, and even though sometimes by fluke, relatively organically. Now what you worry about is players that are going into and ending up in big markets by destination, and the paranoia that comes with the Indianas, the Oklahoma Cities, the Minnesotas, even though Minneapolis is a big city, but losing their stars because guys want to be in destination cities.
Yeah, and you've seen that throughout time, even as much as the NBA has tried to combat that with rookie supermaxes and the supermax in general of trying to retain homegrown talent. And there's been some success stories on it. I feel like, look no further than Nikola Jokic and what has happened in Denver with his commitment to want to be there. And maybe there's a different level of that with the international star versus the local star that's grown up stateside his entire life. It'll be another case study to see what happens with Victor Wembanyama, as there's people already declaring, and I don't think they're that outside of their mind with it. I think it's actually a very rational thought that perhaps the French sensation is the best player in the league in 3 years. Like, that feels like a foregone conclusion by most basketball experts of what he can be. Does he stay in San Antonio his entire career? Because that is still by definition viewed as a small market. To your point, though, about where this thing shifted between the 70s, 80s, and 90s and today, I think you're less at a point, clearly because of the media money, you're less at a point where you have to have the big markets be the one that succeed, so long as you still have stars that have high-level marketability. And there's charisma from Anthony Edwards. There's charisma from Tyrese Halliburton and Jalen Brunson. Like, there are young, marketable stars within this current generation. Now just the question is, what happens to them with the on-court accolades? Do they follow? And you're in a – for people that just love the game of basketball, the style of Nikola Jokic and his ability as a big to do so many different things allures, I think, some fans of the old game, the way it used to be played, while you have on the other side, and of course internally you have Jamal Murray too, but on the other side you have a young, hungry, takeover-capable guard in Anthony Edwards that I think appeases the younger audience as well. You put those two together, that is a series that I get it. It's usually late, requires people to stay up a little bit later for. That is a series that kind of dictates where the future of the league could be headed.
You know, when you think about it, Nikola Jokic, when you watch him play, okay, if you go in, you are insert name of elite level NBA player that is going up and taking on the Denver Nuggets, okay? You go in and you look at Jokic and you think, like, this is not going to be difficult. He's kind of doughy. There's nothing about him that jumps out at you as overly athletic. You don't think that he's necessarily going to be able to, like, beat you to loose balls. He's kind of, he's like gelatinous in his movement. There's nothing about it. From the get-go, you think, like, yeah, I got this, right? And then all of a sudden, by like mid-second quarter, you realize, like, what have I gotten myself into, right? That's kind of like Andy Sweeney with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, right? So taking on Jokic is kind of like bringing your six-pack of Sierra Nevada on an 80-degree day and you're surrounded by a bunch of people that look like Jokic, quite frankly, but they're sweating bourbon. They look like, they're like honey-glazed Spam walking around. A lot of guys in tank tops that literally have like more hair on their back than Richard Simmons on the head. Like, and you're walking around and you're accidentally brushing up against them. You're wading through water in the walkway tunnels and some of it's rainwater.
Not sure if it's water or not.
And then you decide that you've got to go to the restroom, and you go into, you're walking into the restroom, and literally you're like, oh, that's kind of cool that they have a bathtub in the middle to wash your hands in, and then you realize that's actually the common urinal. and all of it's just different than anything that you've experienced before. And midway through, like the second hour, you were literally asking yourself, what did I get myself into? That's why pacing is important. And that's all I'm trying to tell Andy this morning when he's like, look, I got this. And I'm like, listen, many men. It's like the House of the Rising Sun. There is a house in New Orleans. Yeah. Listen, many men have come in here. They're going to tackle it in race one. Just pace yourself. Take it easy. Step back. Pacing, very important. Self-awareness, very important. Don't be bigger than the obstacle. Just let it slide the first day. Don't bring your violin to Carnegie Hall,
Jake,
right?
If pacing wasn't important, there wouldn't be a pace car. Like, let's just be frank.
That is correct.
Right? That should be the embodiment of Andy Sweeney's mentality going into Carb Day in the race.
It's a fairly daunting task. I think, like, I remember when I worked at Channel 6, we had a younger reporter that when we got here, like, we got inside the track, went in a caravan underneath the tunnel and got inside the track and went in to the TV suite here, and she was like, okay, so where is the track itself? And we're like, well, it's right out here. So she looks up and down the straightaway, and she's like, well, this is big, but I thought it'd be bigger. And we're like, well, you realize you're only looking at one
section.
One section of it. She's like, wait, what? I'm like, it goes 2.5 miles around, and it's people all the way around. All of which thought in year one they could do the IPA followed by light beer followed by bourbon mix, right? All of which learned, right?
Well, but that's part of it, though. Sometimes you have to learn by doing, Jake. Sometimes it requires going through the fire and coming out stronger.
Listen, coming out here, there's no such thing as baptism by fire. There's baptism by inferno, right? It's one thing to take a sip of water. It's another to try it out of a fire hydrant. And I'm just telling you.
Look, Jake,
I think we should document this whole thing. Like, they want me doing videos for our website, which, by the way, are available on the Gold Badge. What we need to do is go with the Sweeney routine on race day and follow Andy on race day. Like, people have asked if they could follow me on race day, and it is great. I mean, I'm very lucky to have a very fun and cool job out here. But we need to follow Andy. And in addition to that, if you follow me, like if you're Nick Cottingen, who runs our digital department, and you follow me on race day, you're committed to the checkered flag, right?
Correct. You're locked in.
You follow Andy on race day, there's a real good possibility you're done by 11, right? You're done. I mean, your day's over with, right? You're good to go.
Hey, look, Alex Palou mentioned that Carmel Zionsville area where he resides, he doesn't eat out a lot. Well, to borrow a great establishment up there that maybe he should eat at, that Andy Sweeney, I think, is going to try to take on before he tries to take on the 500, you're headed to Bub's Burgers and Ice Cream, and you're trying the Big Ugly. Everybody wants their picture on the wall, Jake. That's what Andy wants. He wants his picture on the wall.
By the way, you know who's on the wall at Bub's?
Who is on the wall at Bub's?
Both Australians.
Really?
Both Australians.
This past trip or previous trip?
Michael did it. Michael did it the first time that they came here when I was showing those guys around. We went to Bub's, and he conquered the Bub's Challenge. And then last year for the race, when he brought all of his posse, if you will, his cousin Terry did it. And
Two big ugly winners. That's awesome.
And I will say, his cousin Terry did it after we'd already been out eating. It was impressive. That was impressive. Now, but again, even that, I think, is – if you can do the IPA, light beer, bourbon, that is the Triple Crown of motorsports right there. I mean, honestly, you can pull that off, man. I will be impressed. I would be highly, highly impressed.
And a jug of milk at the end too. I mean, what a day for Andy Sweeney.
You know, I meant to mention that. I meant to mention that when we talked to Alex Palou earlier, and he was talking about how his daughter just in the middle of the night wants a bottle, and I'm like, you know what? She's like you. She just wants milk, right? Easy segue that I should have gone with there. All right, when we come back, Jimmy, you ready for your questions of the day?
Always ready for questions.
Whatever questions you might have about this place, we'll get into Pacers Knicks as well. Obviously, we have tickets to give away, but when we come back, we're getting Jimmy up to speed. Pardon the pun on everything out here. Not relating to Andy Sweeney's maiden voyage. When we return to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, you're listening to Query and Company on a Tuesday. It is Tuesday, right?
It is Tuesday.
It feels like a Monday because it's the first day of practice out here, but it's Tuesday. We'll be back. IMS 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Introducing now. Reliable.
Hey, Jake. This conversation about pacing reminds me of the dude in a marathon that's high-fiving every spectator, hooting and hollering in the first 5K. I've seen it. That's the guy that's going to run out of energy and bonk well before the 26.2. Now, somebody else sends me, Jake, send Andy Sweeney over to our Turn 3 party. I guarantee we'll have him on 500 picks within 2 hours. Jake, the important thing to remember about your first race experience is do not become the greatest spectacle in racing.
That's a good one.
That is
line.
Exactly correct. Jake, do you start drinking Pedialyte a couple days before the race like you do for the Mini? Listen, I'm not participating, right? But I will tell you this.
Does it work the same way? I don't think it offsets.
Okay.
I'm going to be able to throw back 2 more Miller Lights because I had Pedialyte 3 days running up to it.
The couple days, there was 1 year for the race. It was really hot, and we all drank a bunch of water. And I'm up there in the top of the Northeast Vista in Turn 3, and that's the best location of the 4 turn spots because it's the easiest proximity to a restroom. Okay. Because you go down the ladder, and I have to yell down to the people down below me because the ladder empties into someone's seat, so they have to get up so that I can come down. But, so I yell down to them, and they clear, and then I run down. There's a back stairwell. I run down it, and there is a restroom there. And I hate being this guy, Jimmy, but it actually is kind of fun because at this point it's the same people every year, right? So if they see me running down, they know why. And I do feel like I will open disclaimer, I do feel bad, but I'm always appreciative of it. There's a long line at the restroom, but people see me and they know what's going on. And so it becomes like a game, like it becomes a thing for them where they're like, clear it out, clear it out. The radio guy's got a caution flag. And boom, I run in, run back out, run up, and then throw back on the headset, shakes back on headset, make it. But in Turn 1, you're really stuck. There's nowhere to go. But in Turn 1, you're secluded. So if need be, Turn 4, it's okay. Turn 2, there was a year during the Brickyard where it was extremely hot, and I was in the old location of Turn 2. I had a ton of water. All of us had. Matter of fact, there was 1 year at the Brickyard. It was so hot that before they sent us out to our turns, they made all of us drink like a large thing of water to make sure that nobody dehydrated. And it was late in the race, and I'm like, man, I've got to use the restroom. And the only thing that I could do, because there was nowhere to go, was I sat down. I had to pull a bag up over me, and I had a container. But you do what you got to do. But in the middle of that process, they came to me for a call, and I'm like, oh boy, I was not expecting that. So I will never divulge which it is, but there is a call that I know of in a race where I know what's going on. But, hey, you got to do what you got to do. But anyway.
I feel like that specific texter, though, was hoping that perhaps the magic of Pedialyte would allow them to throw back a couple more cold ones on race day. I don't buy into that theory. I feel like your priorities are in the wrong space if you think you're going to be able to cheat the system with a couple Pedialyte.
Listen, if you're coming out for race day and you're going all day with it, man, you do whatever you got to do, right?
Sure.
You got to prepare. All right, couple of minutes here, Jimmy. You want to give me a couple of your questions to get you up to speed? Pardon the pun. We should, this is the wildly popular and fledgling and shockingly unsponsored Get Jimmy Up to Speed at the Speedway segment. Okay, so let's go.
Well, let's start with today. And perhaps, Jake, it is good that it's happened on the first day. And I'm going to lower my voice a little bit because as you warned us, talking about the weather here is the equivalent of saying overtime during a JV basketball game.
That's
you
correct.
just don't want to speak it into existence. But that said, from the psyche of the race team, what does day one or any day outside of qualifying do to this lead-up week when you have a rain delay and the laps being able to turn are limited?
Good question. I think that there's a lot of anticipation and excitement about the day, but admittedly, I think this was kind of expected. But the reality is this. We heard Alex Palou talking about it earlier when we had him on. You have now, and I know that people are conditioned to the times when practice leading up to the 500 was multiple weeks, and I loved it as much as anybody. But there are a number of things that factor into the shortening in terms of necessity of days. Number one, these cars are running essentially the same chassis that they've run for repeated years. So a lot of their telemetry and data they can lean on from years past. So they have a pretty good idea. Now, the one thing that is different for this year than years past is that the cars that they are running, it was originally thought that the hybrid engines, which are going to be introduced for IndyCar racing midway through the season, that the hybrid engines, originally it was thought they were going to be ready for the Indianapolis 500. So the weight of those engines is a little bit different. So the chassis on the cars were tweaked a little bit this year to be able to accommodate for that extra weight. So the difference in that weight, they'll have to figure out a little bit. But I think teams had in other words, what I'm getting at is, while they now lose a day of practice, presuming that today they don't get out there, and that leaves practice tomorrow, Thursday, and then Friday, and Friday's when they get the extra boost. So at this point, it's not critical. If they were to lose a day tomorrow as well, then you probably get into a situation where, especially some of the smaller teams, like, for example, Connor Daly and Ryan Hunter-Ray, running with the Dreyer Reinbold with Cusick Motorsports. That's a smaller team that probably doesn't have as much testing and telemetry and data to lean on. So these laps are really important to them. But the big-time teams, the Roger Penske's, the Chip Ganassi's, the Arrow McLaren, they've got a pretty good idea of what they're dealing with. So it's less about tuning their car in and more about just seeing where their car is and then making minor tweaks as need be.
If we individualize it, and this is, again, safe space, full point of ignorance here, but when you're looking at an iconic driver like Kyle Larson, does he need every lap he can get here?
Another great question. And the answer I would say is yes, because I think that the one thing, I'll tell you something interesting to answer that question, Jimmy. Several years ago, I did a story where I asked drivers of the Speedway, what's the hardest turn? Okay? Now, theoretically, this track, all four corners are the exact same. They are all 9 degrees and 12 minutes. I flunked geometry, but I know that those are geometric terms. So all the corners are the exact same. But I asked Al Unser Jr. and Emerson Fittipaldi and R.A. Lyondike and Bobby Rahal and Michael Andretti and Elio Castroneves. And I asked all of them, what's the hardest turn? And all of them had different answers. Not all of them. I mean, the most common answer that was given was turn 2. But all four corners were represented by someone in their answer. Turn 2, a lot of people will tell you, is the hardest because that is the area where there is an opening in the grandstand by where the suites are, so the wind comes through there, and then it kind of gets stuck, and so there's like a swirling air. So the environment is different in Turn 2 than in the other corners. But even drivers that have turned tens of thousands of laps out here and practicing and racing and everything else will tell you that the conditions change the feel and the grip of the track all the time. So you're constantly looking for consistencies to predict. Like when we were talking to Palou and he was talking about Castroneves late in the race, and he said, I could tell that Castroneves figured out the timing of when to make moves late in the race. You learn that stuff constantly of, okay, it's going to take 3 laps to catch up to somebody when the sun is beating down on the straightaway, but it only takes 2 laps if the sun tucks behind and the grip is better, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that the one thing that is a consistent answer amongst any driver is that while they can get to the point where they have a pretty good feeling of how their car feels, there is always something to learn about the different lines of the track and how to drive it when there are different cars on the track and the way that the car responds to the wind and the conditions.
Going back to the weather for a second, is there a point in the week outside of quals, because I realize that would wreck everything, but is there a point in the week where it really starts to complicate matters? Like, not to say that it happens every day. Obviously, the more rainouts you have, the worse it would get. But is there a point in the week where, man, you really can't have that happen outside of quals, even though it's out of your control?
Another great question. So Friday, when you hear people say Fast Friday and you hear about boost, and I get people like, what does boost mean? Well, they are allowed an extra bit of horsepower in their engines so that the engines have basically a small governor on them. They're allowed extra horsepower. All of the engines get an additional, I think it's maybe like 50 horsepower across the board. Same amount of boost for everybody. But it gives you more speed for qualifying. And that speed is allowed in the car to get used to it on Friday. So if your combination of the setup that you have and the extra boost, if you still by midday Friday are not finding the speed that you need out of your car, you're in real trouble. And that's where then because a lot of times if they go out on Friday and they're like, whoa, the car feels perfect, they'll just say, look, put it basically under bubble wrap and let's bring it out for qualifying and go. But if you're still chasing that and you're running out of time, then you've got a real problem because you only get a little bit of time of practice on Saturday, and then you got to go out and make your qualifying run. And if you have no idea what changes need to be made to your car, you're running at the 11th hour at that point. That's like the last 9 weeks of school when you still have a 74 and you know you need an A, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to cram for the final and I'm good to go. Well, you're running out of time rapidly at that point.
I guess last one, I don't want to give away too many of the full pressing questions since this will be an extended segment throughout the week, but hypothetically, if somebody was coming out here for the first time, let's say on race day, and they had a plan of, how much adult beverages they were going to consume, if one was to start with bourbon instead of end with it, would it be less crazy?
Liquor before beer, you're in the clear. Beer before liquor, you've never been sicker, right?
Exactly.
It's all about moderation. It's all about moderation, right? And so here's the thing. This would be my best advice in that regard.
Yeah.
I would listen, as I hope that most people do on this radio station, I would listen to the morning show and JMV and this program.
7 to 10 a.m., noon to 3 respectively,
7
every
to 10.
weekday.
So listen to Kevin and Andy, the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy from 7 to 10. Listen to that program.
3 to 6, excuse me, noon to 3 is us.
And then listen to us, and then listen to JMV. Pay attention to all things, and everything that Andy says, do the opposite. And if you do that, you're in pretty good shape. If you're following Andy Sweeney's plan of attack of IPAs followed by light beer followed by bourbon, you're in trouble.
If we're doing this where we're going to follow him around race day, there needs to be a infographic of the steps to follow Andy should you want to go down that path. That needs to be out there. Digital, get on it. I realize I have no authority. I want Andy Sweeney's guide to race day.
Listen, I want to be very clear here. I don't dispute Andy's ability. I just think out here, everything, for whatever reason, there's something about this place. Everything out here ramps up an extra 15 to 20%.
But Jake, isn't there something?
I know that sounds crazy.
Isn't there some? And I realize this is the other racing spectacle that occurs this month, and it just happened a week ago. But isn't there something admirable about jumping out to the lead in the Kentucky Derby and hoping you can ride it out into the sunset? Like, isn't there something special about getting that lead right out of the gate?
All I got to tell Andy is this. Andy comes from Louisville. Andy knows the Kentucky Derby, and that's the comparison, and it's a good one, right? I mean, it gives you a really good footing of understanding of the Indianapolis 500.
Helps you get your horseshoes underneath you.
The greatest racehorse to ever live is Secretariat. Secretariat holds the track record at all 3 legs of the Triple Crown. If you go back and you watch video of the 1973 Preakness, which is leg 2 of the Triple Crown, you hear the commentator say, and Secretariat is last, just like he was to start the Kentucky Derby. Because it wasn't where Secretariat started, it's where Secretariat finished.
Yeah, it's true.
Secretariat knew that it was about moderation and placement.
Exactly.
And Secretariat in the Kentucky Derby ran each quarter mile faster than the previous quarter mile. That's all you need to know, right?
Well said.
All right. Tickets to give away for the 500. We'll do it later in the show.
What if the next time you painted your home was the last time you painted your home?
Back here at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. You know, Jake, I really appreciate you wearing that crown of being able to guide me through the month of May.
I do what I can.
I appreciate that across the board, and we'll continue that throughout the lead up to the 108th running of the Indianapolis 500.
Now, are you going to the race?
I am not. This is I'm not going. I don't want to throw shots across the bow when the angle at which you are firing is states away, but my niece, who did not grow up here, scheduled or planned and set up her wedding for race weekend.
Well, but she's not from here, right?
She's not. She would have no idea. Yeah. But so I will be out of town on race day. But we'll be here for Carb Day. Looking forward to that show and setting ourselves up for that, being out here all week. And, of course, while I won't be there, Jake, a little bit later in the show, we'll have an opportunity to give away a pair of tickets for one lucky listener, or a lucky listener and a friend to be able to be a part of the greatest spectacle.
They are very, very close at this point to a sellout. Very, very close to a sellout. In terms of the grandstand's permanent seating, very close to a sellout. So tickets are hard to come by, so we have a pair that we will give away. I'm not sure if we figured out how we're going to do that. We're going to talk to Eddie and find that out. But Scott Agness is going to join us, talk about Pacers, Knicks, and the Fever in action as well. That conversation, I should say, in hour number 3 from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Here you're listening to Query & Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Are you dealing with foot, knee, hip?
My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook, the other voice you hear on this program. It is known as Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan, Eddie Garrison, is manning controls for us. You probably hear Brendan King, who you just heard doing the updates, but you occasionally hear him probably in the background recording those. We're in very close proximity to one another here. The only thing separating us is that bulldozer of food that Kurt Darling has worked his way through over the last hour in impressive fashion. As we're at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, practice supposed to be today for the 108th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race, but at the moment on hold due to Mother Nature. Scott Dixon, Marco Andretti, Takuma Sato, the three fastest so far today in very limited track activity. As a matter of fact, the track was open for only 23 minutes today. Joining us now on the program, Scott Agness is in Connecticut because the Fever get their season underway. The Caitlin Clark era begins. Scott, before we get to that and talking about Pacers Knicks, I will begin by asking you this. You are native to Indianapolis. You grew up here in addition to going to high school here and now live here as an adult. You have been to how many Indy 500s in your lifetime?
Hey, Jake. Yeah, I'd probably say 15 to 20 in that ballpark.
Okay.
I don't have a specific number down like so many do, though.
So with that, Scott, you've probably come here as, I would assume, in a media capacity. You've come in a fan capacity. You probably came like in high school or college with friends. We were talking earlier today. I did the morning show with Kevin and Andy Sweeney was asking me about his approach for race day, which is to start the day by drinking IPAs before 9 a.m. and then switching to light beer and then capping it off with bourbon. And I'm predicting he does not see the green flag. Your thoughts? You got to pace, right?
I would agree with you. Yeah, you got to pace yourself. This is not a sprint out there when you're out there. In particular, on those sunny, warm days, which we've been blessed with the last couple of years.
I know, man. And again, as I said, none of this is meant as any, throwing shade at Andy. I'm just saying, you are, I get that you were on the high school swim team and you're feeling pretty confident, but this is English Channel during gale force winds with sharks all around you, right? You're diving into a totally different arena here. I don't know, Scott, that there's another situation I've been in where I have actually tried to wedge myself into a restroom between two sumo wrestlers that are both glazed in jelly, but that's essentially what you're working with on a regular basis at IMS, right?
Yeah, 100%. The key things, pace yourself. You got to have the sunscreen, have your sunglasses, and do not try to mix drinks out there. Always take a break. And more than anything, here's my thing, Jake. People watch. It's the greatest spectacle in people watching.
And that's the thing. Here's the thing.
You want to people watch. You don't want to be people.
Correct.
Watch.
You do not want to be this. You do not want to be the subject of other people's people watching. You know what I mean? And I've always said too, do you realize what you have to do to get arrested out here? That's the other thing. It's an indicator. People look, I'm just telling you. All right. So Scott, let's begin. I will give you recipient's choice. Would you like to begin with Fever conversation or Pacer conversation?
Let's go with Fever. It's the first game tonight at 7:30.
Okay, you have been around. You watched, obviously, just throughout the practices and then the preseason games as well. This is probably, with the exception of Peyton Manning, it may be the most anticipated rookie performance or rookie season for a professional athlete in Indianapolis. From your observation, and I know that you don't have the Iowa basis to compare, but from your observation, Caitlin Clark has handled this spotlight, this attention, this focus in what way?
Just like Peyton Manning. That's been my overwhelming thing, Jake. And as you know, I'm not even talking about on the field or on the court. Everything she does is to a T. She's so self-aware. I was asking her about that today after shoot-around. And just the point to give herself grace, realize tonight's not going to be perfect. This season's not going to be perfect. All the way down to the details of having a Gatorade, one of her sponsors, a towel around her neck, and a Gatorade bottle in her hand, and the Nike logo shines, right, for the cameras when there were probably about 30 media members here today at shoot-around. So to me, no doubt about the hype on the court. I'm more impressed so far of how Caitlin has handled this spotlight. And especially when you compare, Jake, where they were 4 years ago. It's a stark contrast. And what I mean by that, her home opener, season opener at Iowa, no fans. It was during COVID. That was so long ago.
Scott, I realize that you're not yet on scene for the game itself. Like, you're not there yet taking it all in because tip-off is still 5.5 hours away. But there have been half-joking but half-serious comparisons of the Caitlin Clark show being a modern-day sports Beatlemania, if you will, of people just clamoring to want to be a part of this action and see this spectacle. What do you envision tonight being like, this first road crowd, knowing that, yes, the Connecticut Sun fan base are going to want to see their team get a win, but also the spectacle of Caitlin Clark is inherently bubbling to the surface once things tip off?
Yeah, no doubt. Second straight year, the Fever opening against the Connecticut Sun, which is coached, by the way, by Stephanie White of note, which is special. But Connecticut in general, the state has a tremendous heritage of basketball, right? With the Huskies program nearby, and then what the Sun team was able to do this past year. But with Caitlin in particular, look, ESPN normally for a broadcast might send 25 people. They are bringing a WNBA Finals level crew here, over 75 people. They're doing a pregame show for this opening night, as they should, but we just have not seen both that commitment, that investment, and quite frankly, you don't do that unless there's a consumption. And that consumption level from fans and that thirst, fans cannot get enough, which has been phenomenal to see for Caitlin and for the game here, and the fact that it continues to rise, and you'll have a new media deal. And of course, one of the big things they talked about was how they got here. A charter flight. They were the first team in the league to get that experience. It's not full-time just yet as they implement it, but you're going to see all kinds of cameras. I'm expecting more Caitlin fans probably than Fever, and maybe even Sun fans. We'll see. I mean, this is not a league that traditionally sells out games, and right now you're seeing, both because of Caitlin and her colleagues in this rookie class, have really started to change the game, but especially with Caitlin.
Scott Agness is our guest. By the way, Eddie, I don't know if you have the breaking news sounder, Eddie Garrison, but if you do, just go ahead and throw it over me right now as I'm talking. Thank you, Eddie. Breaking news, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has called off practice for the remainder of today. So practice session number 1 has essentially been checkered. It comes just 23 minutes and 37 seconds after green flag activity earlier today. Fastest lap of the day, Scott Dixon, followed by Marco Andretti, Takuma Sato, Pato O'Ward, and Christian Lundgaard. There were, I believe, 28 drivers that took to the track today for a total number of laps turned. I think it was 219 was the total number of laps turned, but I'm going off memory on that. But nobody turned more than 15. So tomorrow, practice will begin at 10 a.m. That was originally scheduled, I believe, for noon. They have moved that to 10 a.m. Okay, Scott, so back to the conversation about the Fever tonight. What's the buzz just in terms of the road atmosphere? I know how much the Caitlin Clark, anticipation is here in Indianapolis, but what about at road venues and a place like Connecticut, which has a pretty rich history of women's basketball?
Yeah, I think you're going to see it fill up fast. I think you'll see it much like when Steph Curry visits any venue, is more fans are glued to the warm-up versus, walking around or getting merchandise or getting food. I'm expecting hundreds and hundreds of cameras just filming her warming up, just like Steph, just like Ja Morant back a couple of years ago as well. And so there's such high expectations for her, and I think she's done a great job of being grounded and understanding, like, this is a transition. They've only had 12 practices, right? Where college, like, you're practicing all summer and going into the year. And I think it's going to be, she's such a high basketball IQ player and can learn on the fly. And much like Tyrese Halliburton as well, Jake, is she is so good at reading people and reading situations. So now it's going to be important for her teammates to try their best to keep up and reciprocate that, because she had like 6 turnovers in their last preseason game. She put in a window that they weren't quite ready for. So that, along with trying to play fast, much like they did at Iowa, those are the things that her and her teammates are going to have to be on the same page here quickly, because it's 7 games in like 12 days to get things started. And this team wants to get back to the playoffs. That they've made it known, we want to be a playoff team again this year.
Hey, Scott, how much do you think Caitlin Clark, Scott Agness is our guest, by the way. He is in Connecticut. Fever opening their season tonight, 7:30. Then 8 o'clock, obviously, it is Game 5, Pacers and Knicks, not far from Connecticut, as a matter of fact, at Madison Square Garden in New York. Scott, how much do you think Caitlin Clark, resentment is the wrong word, but how much of a target do you think she has? Look, the reality is there are a lot of veterans in the WNBA. I'm sure, that are aware of the fact that she has brought extra attention to their sport. But at the same time, I would also assume that comes with it. Again, resentment, probably the wrong word, but a target on her. What do you think the opposition viewpoint is of it all, and is there, in fact, spotlight on her?
I think there's 100% a spotlight on her. I looked at the crowd at a Fever shoot-around practice, right, where a couple years ago, there were probably 2 or 3 people, if that. Today, there were probably 10 cameras, from local to national to NBA Entertainment to ESPN. That's where all of the players in this league stands to benefit. Caitlin Clark's not the exclusive reason why they're getting charter flights, but it's probably the number one reason why it's advanced and now implemented for this season and getting started, rather than pushing it off a year when the new collective bargaining agreement comes out. So from that standpoint, I think everyone is grateful and appreciative of how much spotlight she and those of her in her draft class have brought to the league. Now, on the other side of that, I think the competitiveness on the court is going to come out, right? You'll see players say, hey, you're the next best thing. All right, I want to stop you. I want to see if this is just all hype and stuff. So I think Caitlin will bring out the best in her opponents. I don't think it's a target in the back, like I'm going to be extra physical, I'm going to cheap shot, or those sorts of things early in games by any means.
Scott Agness is our guest. You can find all his work on Fieldhouse Files. Currently, he's in Connecticut for tonight's Fever season opener as they take on the Connecticut Sun. Tip-off time right around 7:30. And, of course, a little bit later tonight, Game 5 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. Even at 2 games apiece as the action shifts back to the Garden for the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers. Scott, I know you followed that extensively as well, and we'll dive into the Pacers a little bit more here in a second. But on the New York Knicks side of things, the obvious statement after what transpired in Game 4 is the idea of Brunson, Hart, and DiVincenzo combining for 27 points is ludicrous, I think. Even though the pace and the fatigue is there, that feels like an anomaly game for those 3. But when you look at the bodies still falling around them and Hartenstein, even though x-rays came back negative, and you figure he's still likely to give it a go tonight, where do, if at all, things change for Coach Tom Thibodeau in a pivotal Game 5 they cannot afford to drop?
Yeah, I would agree with you there, just given the lack of depth. And the surprising thing here is that Isaiah Hartenstein not on the injury report. After, by the way, and I give Jay credit, he had the kind of scoop right there courtside of seeing how Isaiah was clearly in a lot of pain. I think he said after the game how he felt a pinched nerve and was dealing with that. So I was surprised to see him not on the injury report. This simply comes down to less so, I think, adjustments and more about them getting back to what they have known to do, right? And that's the hard play, that's the rebounding, all the things that the Pacers dominated them in that department. That's why they were able to come away with that win. I don't see a ton of adjustments. I think they did benefit from guys not having to play a full workload, like Josh Hart's been playing 48 minutes over almost every single game. And then the juice that is absolutely provided when you play inside MSG. But if the Pacers
how much do you bank on that, Scott? How much do you bank on that, the Garden specifically? Because I figured you'd go there eventually, and we've talked about it as well. Mm-hmm. There's something about that place, not just the history of it, but just the idea and the energy of this being a lovable, rugged underdog team that in a lot of ways embodies the spirit of New York.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I think the biggest thing for the Knicks being back home is just being in your environment with your recovery tools, right? There's so many little things that go into getting them ready for games. In terms of the home court, it's one of the best environments, no doubt, in the league. But I think just being back at home, much like the Pacers had that advantage at Gainbridge Fieldhouse with the phenomenal crew, I think that can help give you that shot of energy when they definitely didn't even have it to start the previous game. And they just badly need to get off to such a good start because this Knicks team doesn't have that depth, and they can't afford to lose this one and come back to Indianapolis with 2 must-win games coming up.
Scott, I've always gotten the impression, Scott Agness is our guest, Fieldhouse Files. He's on the always busy and shockingly unsponsored guest line. Scott, I've always gotten the impression that games or series in the NBA are officiated advantage home team or skewed home team just a little bit for the first 6 games, and then a Game 7 is actually called pretty evenly. You agree with that?
I think much like for both teams, I feel like the first couple games the officials get a feel for the series, the matchups, the physicality, and then they ease into it a little bit. And I will say with Game 7, to your point, I think the tendency is more to let them play, let them decide the series, because the officials do not want to become the subject of the story of a late foul call or anything like that. That's definitely a tendency.
Also, Scott, for the Pacers coming into this, now having rattled off 2 straight games, and again, I don't think that what they did defensively is something that can replicate, just because you're looking at a team that from New York has a lot of primary weapons. We know the depth is on the Pacers side, but that trio of DiVincenzo, Hart, and Brunson have been sensational throughout this entire playoff run. I know you mentioned the extended rest that they get. If you're looking at it from a glass half full perspective, sure, you got your ass kicked, but hey, you got rest out of the deal. At least that slows things down a bit in your recovery timeline. But specifically from the Pacers' point of view, defensively, they can't replicate fully what they did. But if they're able to even have, I would argue, a fourth of the level of defensive tenacity that they had in Game 4, how much more does that open up for this team if that's suddenly a turning point element of even, again, a quarter of the level of defensive effort that they put forth in Game 4?
Yeah, it feels like they found something here the last couple of games with what their defensive matchups and what the coaches switched there in terms of adding size on Jalen Brunson with Nesmith on him rather than physicality, the lean more with Andrew Nembhard. And then this past game moving Nembhard onto DiVincenzo, and he was clearly running on fumes, 3 for 13, just 7 points. But Nembhard obviously played well into that. And then the other factor that was a stark contrast was the bench. The fact that the bench, they don't have to be exceedingly good, but the fact that TJ McConnell has had his first 2 career double-doubles in this series, that's been remarkable. You've got great minutes from Obi Toppin and Ben Shepherd. Everything that the Pacers need to go their way absolutely went that way in terms of defense, shots going down, and getting that contributions from their bench, and even a strong start. This team has not been a good starting team, and they absolutely made a statement in that first quarter going up 20 and removing any hope, I felt like, from the Knicks after that first period.
Scott Agness is our guest. You got out to Connecticut when in anticipation of this game tonight?
I took the 5 a.m. flight yesterday through Charlotte.
Okay. So you've been. My point being, you've been in that area now for a day. What is the mood, just in terms of from a fan base or the media? Whatever you saw, like in the tabloids or the sports talk radio, whatever it may be. Is it foregone conclusion from the New York standpoint of, it's a Hicks Knicks, like, let's go Knicks, like, Game 5 to God and it's over? Or is it more like, no, like we're in serious trouble here and Tom Thibodeau's run us into the ground?
Yeah, I think there's more concern than there is excitement for returning back to New York. And I say that because OG Anunoby remains out. And he's been such a significant piece. I think they're 26-5 this season when he plays. And we see what he does at both ends of the floor, on top of Brunson suffering that foot injury that limits him. So I think there's probably cautiously concerned from New York side of things going into this one, with the eye of, Boston has been a little bit vulnerable during this postseason. And so some are already thinking about that matchup and how it maybe would not be a dominating win, whomever their opponent would be, more so that there is a real opportunity in this Eastern Conference just because of current health situations on every team.
Scott, Jake and I talked about this to open the show in regards to just listening to a little bit of, or reading a little bit of, New York media, New York fan takes on where things are at, just to see how the other half is living through this series. And there is a subsection of Knicks fans, especially because they have been a tortured franchise the last 20, 30 years, of, man, the opportunity to take full-scale momentum in this series died when Nembhard hit from 32. If the Pacers wind up winning this thing, be it 6 or 7 games, will that Game 3 have been the turning point in your mind, where the Knicks are on the doorstep of an insurmountable 3-0 series lead and the Pacers are able to find a way to get that much-needed win at home?
Yeah, no question about that, Jimmy, just because we've never seen a team come back from a best of 7 when you're trailing 0-3. And that would have zapped the hope, I think, out of the Pacers and this fan base that hey, we were in it every single game and you lost the first 3 and now you have to go and win the next 4, including 2 on the road, which just seems insurmountable, even despite the health concerns with the Knicks. And that completely flipped it. That shot is what we'll remember just because it's offense, but almost just as important was that Miles Turner block at the other end on Josh Hart. That would have given the Knicks a 2-point advantage there with 2 minutes left.
Yeah, the Turner block was huge, and I do think that we forget about that because of the magnitude of that shot, but that might have been – you can only imagine, right? I mean, I guess if you are New York, Scott, you are talking just as much about the woulda, couldas of that block and what happens the other way as Indiana is about the Neesmith overturned call in – was that 1 or 2? Mm-hmm. That was game 1, right? You know what I mean? Like that is a game potential swinging play.
That block, didn't it have somewhat feel shades of Tayshaun Prince on Reggie? Not quite the same
That's a very good point, yeah.
Not quite as late in the game, but that kind of zapped what the Knicks had to be feeling at that moment. Like, hey, look, we're on the road. We're right in this. We've gotten a couple back-to-back stops, and then that block happened. The same basket, the same end, the same side of the rim as Roy Hibbert's block on Carmelo, by the way.
How important is the TJ McConnell minutes at this stretch of the series? Because we've seen how important it's been throughout the playoffs, but in this pivotal Game 5 in New York, how important is his specific unit to success tonight in New York?
So huge, just because of the speed at which they're able to get down the floor and really help re-emphasize the necessary, to pick up the pace and sort of things. Because when that second unit wasn't able to contribute like they didn't the last time, a couple games ago in New York, it was a stark contrast of what this Pacers team looked like. Normally, they're the ones that keep things afloat, if not pick things up a little bit more and not allow for that drop-off. And I can't say enough good things about what TJ McConnell has done this season. He had a career year last year, had the weird start to this year. There was many games where he got DNPs, coaches' decisions, and now I would still say he's been the Pacers' most consistent player since the All-Star break. For a guy that, when he signed here in the first place, was a third-string guard and a point guard that before this season started, some thought might be traded and was started the season out of the rotation.
Scott, have you gone to games in the Garden before?
I have, yeah.
How would you rate the Garden and the environment of the Garden?
If you're talking strictly building and such, one of the worst. If you talk about environment, electricity, the setup, probably the best in the league. I think the Lakers have the best overall show, but there is nothing like the crowd, whether it's a losing Knicks season like it was, 4 or 5 years ago when I was there, or most recently here in the last couple of years. There's just nothing like it. That energy.
There's
and
just a magic about it, right?
Of New York fans.
I mean, there's just a magic about it. Like I've said before, you could be going to literally like a baseball card show on a Tuesday in July, and just getting off the train and the hustle and the bustle of the people and the walkways into the Garden. There's just a magic about it, right?
It's also been a theater as well, Jake, for just like, I know it's at the expense of Knicks fans, but that being a regular season stage for players, franchise players,
Correct.
to have their best outings. And Scott, I mean, you've seen that over the course of even the last 10 years, the Kobe Bryants, the Jordans, the LeBron James of the world, viewing it as, I know it's overused and it makes people cringe here, but that mecca of New York City, and it being a center Broadway stage for not just playoff performances, but a lot of people have their best nights in the Garden.
It's not that they have their best nights there, Jimmy, as much as they have a good night, and because it's in the Garden, that accelerates.
Sure.
To your point, right? I mean, you could have a 55-point night in Oklahoma City, and it's like, that's cool. But when it's in the Garden, Scott, you agree, right? There's just it's a bigger stage, to Jimmy's point.
Yeah, because more people are watching, they're in that environment. And oftentimes, like right now, normally we're talking about the NBA Draft Combine, right? I'm in Chicago, we're covering that. One of the things all those players are asked about is what environment, what team do you look forward to? And I would guess 8 out of 10 answers, the first answer is MSG, New York, because there's always, to your point, Jake, something magical about that experience for these guys.
Scott, you probably knew this because you cover the sport so well, but be honest with me. Least memorable or shoved it down our throat draft lottery since when? Because I'll be honest, I got to raise the hand. I forgot about it, and I was disappointed in myself. I didn't know about it until after, the Hawks were 3% chance. Now they're the first overall pick. So most watered-down draft lottery since when?
A decade plus? I don't even remember. Yeah. And so that tells you, right? Because there wasn't an anticipation for several reasons. The first being is you didn't have that sure thing product. The last 2 years, in this last year, both the NBA and WNBA have had the clear-cut, franchise-changing, no doubt number one pick. So we all wanted to tune in to see which franchise was going to be that fortunate. On the other side of that, which many may not recognize, is the different setup. Like, it was on a Sunday, it was on an afternoon, trying to go into that Pacers ABC broadcast. Normally, it's a Tuesday night, it's in prime time. It leads in, I believe, to the Eastern Conference final game. So it was just a very different set of circumstances as well, combined with this being seemingly one of the most boring draft groups and maybe not franchise-altering type talent. All those factors weighed into most people probably missing out on what even happened. And it didn't impact the Pacers locally either. And so that's another key thing.
I didn't even see it, so I don't know the answer to this. Here's what I know about this year's draft lottery. The Atlanta Hawks won. I know that the Atlanta Hawks have only ever had the number one overall selection once. They drafted a guy that actually went to the ABA and did not play for the Atlanta Hawks, and David Thompson, if I'm not mistaken. But who did Atlanta send as their representative? Do we know?
I have no idea.
I'll be honest.
Do you know, Scott?
I wasn't watching either. I was not watching either because I was tuned into this Pacers pregame.
Can somebody text or tweet me and let me know who Atlanta sent as their representative? I don't think it was Trae Young.
It was their general manager, Landry Fields, is who represented.
Landry Fields, former New York Knick.
Indeed, correct. Yep.
Second round. He's the general manager?
I'm trusting NBC Sports, Jake. I'm going out on a limb with NBC Sports.
Scott Agness, if you get this right, I'll give you $1,000. You ready? You ready?
Sure.
I'll pay for your flight back from Connecticut. Landry Fields was drafted to the New York Knicks in the same year as what other Knick player? One guess. Boom. Go. No looking it up. Come on. Go. Boom. Go.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to think of who that draft class would have been. Ooh. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of the players available.
Both second-round picks. He was drafted in the second round along with one other player. They had 2 second-round picks that year. This was during a 3-year period, Scott, where I was actually paying attention to the New York Knicks moves.
I'm not sure.
Andy Routens, shooting guard out of Syracuse. See?
Yep,
you guys think that there's nothing You guys think there's nothing trapped in this melon that's a third the size of Eddie Garrison's head, but yet there it goes. There it goes. All right, Scott, so your coverage tonight for the Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark debut, and Connecticut Sun. We will hear and see about it where, and then also I'm sure you will have some Pacers Knicks as well. Give us a scoop.
Yeah, absolutely. All at fieldhousefiles.com where you can follow all that coverage, as well as YouTube channels really taking off right now as everybody can't get enough of Caitlin and this Fever team. So I'll have all that. And then probably on my flight home, I'll watch the Pacers game and write about that before doing my post-game podcast like I've been doing throughout the playoffs.
Love it. All right, well, travel safely. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, Scott Agness joining us from Fieldhouse Files. We come back. We've got tickets to give away. Eddie, did you determine the fashion in which we're going to give away tickets to the 108th Indianapolis 500-mile race?
On the air.
Man, you're pulling out all the stops today, man.
I know.
You're pulling them all out.
Eddie is getting after it. Are we doing trivia again today?
Oh, yes, Jake. Duh. Come on now.
We've had good success with our trivia questions. All right, we'll do trivia.
The kids love it, I've heard, actually, believe it or not.
We'll let Eddie decide when we come back. He'll let us know when we're giving away the tickets, because kids do love it. We've had a lot of research on that, and that's one thing we've learned. You're listening to Aquarium Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
A slow network is no network for business.
Back here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Jimmy, you have eaten at Red Lobster how often?
It's been a while.
Well, apparently you're not the only one, right?
Yes, exactly.
Are you not familiar with the news regarding Red Lobster?
I'm not. No,
okay.
No, I'm sorry.
Red Lobster yesterday, told, I don't know, a significant number of their restaurants it's over.
The dream is done.
Yes.
There was one on, Thompson in Meridian on the south side that I think, died and was killed off. Maybe it's still there. I don't know. But shortly after, a lot of construction that went on in terms of redevelopment. So I think the signs were there for a while. But I will say, and I hope this at least continues, Jake, I've had this more recently than actually sitting down at Red Lobster.
Long John Silver's?
No, but you can get the cheddar biscuit quick set at home. You can just go to Kroger, grab it, and make your own cheddar biscuits. Red Lobster has their label
well,
on
maybe
that.
maybe that's what did them in.
Maybe. They gave away the golden goose.
Everybody was like, wait a minute. I don't know if I've ever confessed this. I think if I lived, and I don't even know if this is I would assume it's legal. I don't know. Maybe this is, if I lived near, and I'm not saying I don't like lobster. I'm not, it's good. Don't get me wrong. But if I lived near a place like an ocean, I think probably every couple of weeks when I'm bored, I would go to a grocery store and or Red Lobster and buy one of the lobsters and then drive it to the ocean and set it free.
A little liberation.
Yeah. I feel bad for those guys, right?
I be honest, much like the cows and in terms of where the delicious hamburgers come from, I try to just close my mind off from
I get it.
I think it comes the territory of if you head down that rabbit hole, you're in trouble.
I was driving the other day on the interstate, and there was a semi with livestock in the back.
That's always tough, man.
You're oh, man. These poor guys, they know what's going on here.
A number one, please. Thank you.
It's rough, right? So, Eddie Garrison, did you determine the time in which we are giving away tickets for the 500?
Right now.
Okay. And we are doing so how?
We've got callers on the line, so feel free.
Okay, I will.
Indy 500
Here's
trivia.
the thing.
They've
Eddie,
already called 239-1070. That's already been done. They're ready to go. Okay,
correct.
Awesome.
So, Eddie, here's the thing. I'm going to have to rely on you to let us know, okay? I'm going to have to rely on you to let us know who, you select, because I don't have a way to see it here, unfortunately. So who would we have first that, Eddie, as screening the callers, that you thought to yourself, sounds like a nice person?
Jimmy, do you have a call number in mind?
Let's go 6 because Pacers in 6.
All right, so we will go with Dennis.
Dennis.
Hey,
Dennis, what's
Jake,
going
how
on?
you doing?
Dennis, I'm good. You sound fired up. Dennis, have we spoken before?
We have, and I got to tell you something. What is hilarious, what you just got done talking about. My wife worked for Red Lobster for 45 years.
Really?
Really.
Now, okay, so
was that 45 years as of yesterday?
Yeah, I was going to say.
No, she got out about 5 years ago because we knew what was coming.
Well, that's Dennis. In all honesty, and I don't want to upset anybody if they're an advertiser or whatnot. But was there indication as to what was going on there or why this was declining?
I'll just say the management went downhill, and from there everything went downhill.
Okay. Did anybody ever come in and buy a lobster and take it home and then set it free?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Did you get a lot of those cheddar biscuits? Did she ever bring those home?
When we were first married, I used to make her bring home a handful of them in her purse every night.
Good man.
Okay. All right, I like that. All right, Dennis, what is your level? Let me ask you this. What is your level of fanaticism for the Indianapolis 500-mile race?
Oh, it used to be an 8 or a 9. It's probably tailed off to a 7.
Okay, but have you been to the race before?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what is your thought when our morning guy Andy Sweeney says that his approach is going to be IPAs by 9 a.m. before 9 a.m. and then light beer all day and then cap it off with bourbon, and that's how he's going to enjoy the Indy 500? Would you agree with us that pacing and scaling back might be smart at your rookie campaign?
Let's say if Andy was 18, he might be able to pull it off, but he ain't got a chance.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Dennis the Menace, here is your question. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This Indianapolis 500 veteran of yesteryear had a phenomenal start to his career when he finished second, third, fourth, and second in his first 4 races. The fourth of those races, the runner-up finish, was significant because in his final pit stop, when he had the race in hand, unfortunately, his gearbox caused an issue that made him stall in the pits, thus allowing Allenser Sr. to pass him and win his 4th Indianapolis 500. Can you name this driver who would later go on to win a pole on a heartbreaking day?
I've got a guess, and he used to be my favorite driver. Can I get a little hint? Did he drive a turbine?
I don't believe he drove a turbine because this would have been after that. I could be wrong in that. I could be wrong in that.
All right, because
I will tell you this.
Thinking his initials were PJ.
Well, keep in mind that Allenser Sr. won his 4th Indianapolis 500 in 1987.
Okay.
It is not Parnelli Jones. It is not Parnelli Jones.
He was my favorite. I used to love that car going by.
This guy won. I know. This guy won the pole in 1992 in the Quaker State car and then spun on the parade lap.
Oh, God. I'm going to kick myself for not knowing this because I can remember that happening, but who it was. How about
Dennis, let me ask you this.
Choice?
What's that? Okay, how about multiple? How about this? Call your wife and ask her to stop and bring home one more purse full of cheddar biscuits so that you win something today. How's that? Does that work?
Sounds like a winner.
All right, Dennis. I appreciate the call. We'll go to another caller. Eddie, who do we got next?
Let's go with Brian.
Brian.
Yes.
All right, Brian. You just heard the question that I asked to Dennis. So, Brian, do you have a wager? I will tell you again. Second, third, fourth, and second. First 4 races of this guy's Indy 500 career. In 1987, he was leading the race. He pitted late. He had a gearbox issue. He stalled it. Allenser Sr. passed and won the race. 5 years later, this man would actually sit on pole in the Quaker State car, but spun on the parade lap, ending his race before it began.
And I want to say Roberto Guerrero.
And I'm sorry, tell me your first name again. Brian, is that right?
Yeah.
Brian, have you been to the Indianapolis 500 before, Brian?
Oh, yeah.
Were you planning on going to the Indianapolis 500 this year?
Yep.
Do you have tickets to the Indianapolis 500, just out of curiosity?
No, I do not.
Well, you do now, Brian. Roberto Guerrero is indeed the correct answer. Roberto Guerrero is correct.
I had 2. Greg Ray. Didn't Greg Ray wreck on the pace lap too?
No, Greg Ray was on the pole when he was in, it might have been actually his rookie year, he was in the Ash kicker car. You might be thinking of Scott Sharp, who sat on pole and crashed in turn number 1 at the start of the race. But in terms of the pole, Roberto Guerrero. Brian, Eddie will get your information, and you are on your way, man. Thanks for listening.
Sweet.
Dennis, I appreciate it, by the way.
Much.
And thank you to Dennis for being a good sport as well. We'll come back. We'll put a tie on all of it. We'll recap for you what's happened today. We'll preview what's going to happen tonight. Query Company here, live from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on The Fan.
What if the next time you painted your home was the last time you painted your home? how I win.
In both conference semifinals, one in the East and one in the West, and both tied at 2 games apiece. We'll start first with the game out west. The Minnesota Timberwolves travel back to Denver. No home team has won a game yet in this series as they're tied at 2 games apiece. We will take the Minnesota Timberwolves 4-point dogs. We will scoop the 4 on the T-Wolves tonight in Denver. In that same game, give me star Anthony Edwards over 29.5 total points for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Tonight, Pacers, Knicks, Game 5, the pivotal Game 5 as the series shifts back to the Garden. Give me over 20.5 total points for Tyrese Halliburton, over 19.5 total points for Pascal Siakam, as I feel you need good nights from both to win Game 5 on the road. And ultimately, I'll take the Pacers outright on the money line, that at plus 102 juice, depending on where you go. Last bet for you, it's in the world of baseball. We'll take the New York Yankees to win the money line against the Minnesota Twins. They begin a 3-game set up against Minnesota. Eddie has no plays, so those are your plays of the day.
All right, here's my play of the day. You ready?
I'm ready for it.
My play of the day is that tomorrow they are going to move practice from noon until 10. And practice is going to be from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. tomorrow at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in what essentially is the first day of practice out here, because today it was very fractured, to say the least. But they did get enough in to know that Scott Dixon turned a 229.107 miles an hour. That's the fastest time of the day. Marco Andretti, Takuma Sato, Pato O'Ward, Christian Lundgaard, Elio Castroneves, Colton Herta, Felix Rosenquist, Kyle Kirkwood, and Stingray Robb, the top 10. Next 5, Calum Eilert, Marcus Ericsson, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Romain Grosjean, and Connor Daly. Others of note that people might be interested in: Ed Carpenter was the 16th fastest today, Scott McLaughlin 18th, Alexander Rossi 19th, and Santino Ferrucci 23rd, Graham Rahal 24th. But keep in mind, most of those not really getting up to speed, just kind of getting a feel for where things are. For tonight, did you put anything on Caitlin Clark over under?
I did not.
I'll put Caitlin Clark's over under at 16.5. What would you say to that?
I would say that sounds about right. I would say somewhere in the range of 16.5 to 18.5. I was to guess off the top. Let's see. Fever and Sun player points. 21.5 is the number tonight for Caitlin Clark in her WNBA debut. That taking place 7:30 tonight as the Fever in Connecticut against the Sun.
Thanks to Alex Palou, by the way. That conversation is available, I believe, up on the podcast center on the website. Good stuff, including his tips to Jimmy on how to handle fatherhood, which is cool. That you guys can get like a deal at Babies R Us or something together, right?
Perhaps, and maybe we can further divulge the areas that if he does go out to eat every now and again, where in Carmel and Zionsville, that's my neck of the woods.
Babies R Us, though, when it comes to drivers, that actually was the known hotspot of Felipe Giafoni. That falls under the category of if you know, you know. But Alex Palou, good stuff earlier today, and then Scott Agness. In terms of tonight, I do think it's one of those games, Jimmy, that you're going to have a pretty good feel. I think New York will come out kind of like what Indiana did to New York in Game 4. You're going to have to weather a storm a little bit there in the beginning, right? Because there's going to be an atmosphere and an energy. And I think Jalen Brunson's going to be probably back to kind of Jalen Brunson, even though I know he is hobbled. There's no doubt about that. But he's an electric player, and they're going to be juiced for it. And if Indiana can weather that storm, I think the depth helps them out later in the game,
right? The Knicks do not have the reserve fuel, if you will, to be able to fall behind early and try to navigate their way through it. They need to be setting the pace, leading things from the onset. I think that they can do that, but ultimately, I think the Pacers' depth, led by T.J. McConnell, and a big game from Pascal Siakam, make enough plays to make it 3-2 Pacers going into Game 6 on Friday night.
By the way, I don't even know if it's cold outside, but it looks cold out, doesn't it? We're the third floor of the media center overlooking, and you can see the flags.
The wind, yeah.
The wind is actually coming from the east, which is odd, but, I mean, it just looks like it would be chilly outside. I don't know whether it is or not, but we shall see. Beyond the Bricks tonight, 8 o'clock, Mark Monteith joining Mike Thompson and I. We'll talk about his book about Bill Vukovich, and you'll hear some old clips from Bill Vukovich as well. So we look forward to that. Again, thanks to Alex Palou, Eddie Garrison, Jimmy Cook. Thanks to Brennan King and Kurt Darling for their cameos, whether intentional or not. And thanks for listening. We'll be back. JMV is with you next. We'll be back tomorrow at noon here on Query & Company.
This is May. It's Indy. And